We have spacecraft from another species.
We do, yeah.
How many?
Quite a number.
You're saying there is an intelligent species engaging with this planet?
Yes.
Everybody watching this right now is looking at your face. They're going, is this guy for real?
Today we're going to talk about David Grusch. You've probably seen him in the news. Greg, tell us about the videos we're going to watch.
Yeah, I think it's worth your time to go look up his background. He's worked at Geospatial. According to the people who did the interview, they've background checked him and all of his records check out. He was an intelligence officer in the Air Force, and we'll leave it at that.
You had the security classifications to go anywhere and ask anyone anything.
I had, based on my formal security clearance and multiple polygraphs, I had the ability to be read into any program that I needed. At one point in time, I was extremely highly cleared.
What conclusion did you come to at the end of your time on the UAP task force?
The UAP task force was refused access to a broad crash retrieval program.
When you say crash retrieval, what do you mean?
These are retrieving non-human origin technical vehicles, call it spacecraft if you will, non-human, exotic origin vehicles that have either landed or crashed.
We have spacecraft from another species.
We do, yeah.
How many?
Quite a number.
You're kidding.
No. I thought it was totally nuts, and I thought at first I was being deceived. It was a ruse. People started confiding in me. They approached me. I have plenty of current and former senior intelligence officers that came to me, many of which I knew almost my whole career, that confided in me they were a part of a program. They named the program. I've never heard of it. And they told me, based on their oral testimony, and they provided me documents and other proof, that there was, in fact, a program that the UAP task force was not read into.
You are alleging that the US government has been concealing the existence on this planet of alien life.
I would couch it as non-human intelligence, NHI, like we would like to say in our language.
Why do you say that? Why do you say NHI?
I don't want to necessarily denote origin. I don't think we have all the data to say, oh, they're coming from a certain location, and I couch it as somebody who studied physics, where maybe they're coming from a different physical dimension as described in quantum mechanics. We know there's extra dimensions due to high energy particle collisions, etc., and there's a theoretical framework to explain that. Yeah.
Just let me cut to the quick though. You're saying there is an intelligent species engaging with this planet?
Yes, that's potentially extraterrestrial, yeah.
I speak for everybody sitting at home. That is a shock.
It was to me, and I had a lot of sleepless nights.
All right, Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, so let's first start off by talking about a couple of things. He's going to talk a lot about clearance and that kind of thing. And clearances, if you've never been in the military, there are levels of clearance and then there's access. So once you get to the level of clearance, like top secret, then it becomes access. And there are programs past that, I'm sure. You'll hear him talk about things like Title 50 and Title 10. Those are different divisions and different kinds of intelligence. But the problem is, even if I and Chase both have the same clearance, but we don't have a need to know about the other guy's project, guess what? We don't get to know. That's when he talks about read on or read in. He's talking about being part of a program where he gets to have access to that. Otherwise, you get things like Snowden and those kinds of things where they have all this knowledge they can take away and walk away. So compartmentalized information is important. So when he's talking about, I could be read onto anything, it doesn't mean he was. It means he could be. That's a different, very different thing. Let's also talk about what it takes to hide something. If you're a person who has something to hide, which I'm going to tell you as we walk through this thing, there's certainly a glass wall up somewhere here. What he's trying to hide, don't know, but he's certainly trying to hide something. And when you're trying to hide something, it gets harder and harder to hold on to that information the longer the conversation goes, because you've got to appease your interviewer. And by that, I mean, you got to keep that person thinking that what you're doing is divulging enough information. When you interrogate a person, that person needs to threshold think. And by that, I steal that from my protective driving days. And we would talk about threshold driving, so that you're right on the brakes, just short of letting the nose dip. That's threshold driving, threshold braking. Threshold thinking is I pay attention to you and I don't go far enough to tip your hand. I have to be very careful. So they have to appease the interviewer. disclose as little information as they can possibly do, and then maintain believability. And those three things are a lot, because the longer you talk, the more likely you are to paint a negative of the exact thing that you're trying to hide, so that it's the only thing missing and people can build a picture of it. That's what intelligence does. That's how we work. This guy starts off threshold thinking. I can see it because he's doing romancer. His eyes are locked. He's paying attention to this guy. We do this in elicitation all the time, because if you overstep your bounds, then the person knows what you're after. This guy's doing romancer. He's got no real answers. He uses words like quite a few, oral testimony, quite a number. I don't hear any real answers so far. I could answer everything he's done. He does, yeah, that's his intro to get in. I do it all the time. It's my intro to boxing in my answer. It gives me 20 seconds to get into the next part of the conversation. So pay attention to what the guy's doing. That's what we're seeing.
All of us guys on the behavior panel, we're pretty busy and we're coming and going constantly. So we don't have a lot of time when it comes time to eat, to go to the grocery store, decide what we're going to eat, get everything, come home, prepare it, and then cook it. So it's a lot of fast food and expensive takeout. But now all that's changed because we found Factor. So what is Factor? Factor is a meal delivery service. And Factor makes meeting your nutrition goals easier than ever by delivering fresh, never frozen, dietitian-approved meals right to your doorstep. Their team of gourmet chefs create each meal using only ingredients with integrity to help you feel your best all day long. Factor meals arrive pre-prepared and ready to eat in 2 minutes, which is perfect for busy lifestyles. Factor's chef-prepared meals make it easy to eat well. You don't have to get takeout. You don't have to get fast food. You don't have to opt for something that isn't good for you. You can eat healthy by using Factor. We do. It's awesome. Look at this. Are you kidding me? This is awesome. So it's faster than delivery and takeout. And every meal is delivered fresh, never frozen, right to your door. So head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code TBP50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. That's factor75.com or click the link below and use the code TBP50 to get 50% off your first Factor box.
Chase, what do you got? Same kinds of things, I'm sure.
Yeah, so let me set the record straight here. 90% of anyone in the military has the ability to be read into any program that they need to operate in. And I'm talking 19-year-olds with a security clearance can say that same sentence and be truthful. When he's saying, I'm extremely highly cleared, I think what he might be referring to is the White House level, which is kind of above top secret, if you want to consider that, which most people don't even hear the name of this level of clearance, but, you know, we like to deliver here for you on the behavior panel, and that's called Yankee White. So he's referring to the clearance level of Yankee White, which isn't really a clearance, but it's kind of a nickname for a level of access. So when it comes to clearance, there's no named clearance above top secret, but there are those special access things like this with nicknames and stuff. And if you watched the show before, you know what lip compression is when somebody squeezes their lips together. But if you see right after he says crash retrieval program, there's a strong lip compression here. And we typically say this indicates somebody's withholding something. And in this instance, he's absolutely holding things back here. He even says that openly. He's only able to share a little bit. But keep an eye out for when you see this lip compression in the coming videos that we're going to dissect for you. We're going to reveal a lot. And there's one thing here that I want to focus on that I think will become glaringly important in the coming videos. When he says the words potentially extraterrestrial, there's the strongest point here of lip compression. He does not think, in my opinion, probably doesn't think that the beings are extraterrestrial. So lip compression being withholding is kind of a good baseline for him. And his vehement yes is then followed by a head shake and a dramatic reduction in volume. And there's also a strong downward left eye accessing, which means like he's kind of talking to himself. We'll talk about this a little bit more later. And I'm about 100% sure what he specifically thinks these things are. I think I know what he thinks they are. And I'm going to show you in one of the videos coming up. But overall, this is probably mostly credible. He's got a strange baseline to begin with. And Scott, what do you got?
All right. His delivery is really smooth, like it's rehearsed, like he's gone over this not 5 times, 10 times, but 20 times. He's done this a whole lot. That's what it sounds like to me. He's really confident. His volume's good. He's got great eye contact. You're right. He's got an odd baseline because he moves so much. His head moves so much, and he uses his whole mouth when he says words and all. When he's talking, and it just looks weird. And it's that overconfidence that children have quite often. And I see that now. At the same time, I think this is a master class in micro expressions because his mouth movements and his eye movements and his eyebrows and his brow are flying around everywhere. And I think you can lock up the specific words he's saying, and you can see the anger in him, and you can see the fear in him, and you can see the confidence in him. You can see these things when you start narrowing them down, and which we'll go over a little bit later on when we get some really huge ones in here. He said, I had many officials approach me. It sounds like all of a sudden all these people started coming to him, and which makes me go, why is everybody coming to this guy? What's so special about this guy? He's supposed to be smart. Apparently he's a physicist or something. Knows all about nuclear energy, all these things that he talks about. He's a pretty smart guy apparently, because I think he got a scholarship or something in physics or chemistry or something. His illustrators are really low. They're in his lap, but they're really affirming. They're when they happen, they're right where they should be. They land right on the words like they should when he's making a point. They're not really big. We're going to see him get a little bit bigger later on, but so far that lets me know he's controlled because he's rehearsed what he's saying. He's rehearsed the concept. Some of these sentences I think he's actually said before out loud as he's done this. If he was, if somebody helped him rehearse this. So it looks really, really easy for him to do. When he says, I don't want to denote the origin of where these things came, which he already did. He's already been talking about how they're from space, or they're spaceships. Then he starts talking about these different dimensions, how he brings in all these things that all of a sudden make it possible to happen. It's not what we're used to hearing. We're used to hearing, there's a UFO from outer space. They came and landed and these guys got out. These things got out. No, he's talking about other dimensions. Now, when you start doing that, these are these exercises that super smart people go through. When they start talking about, all the different dimensions, this could possibly be happening. There's a person just like you and another one, except they've got red hair. And then since you can think it up, there's one that's got, 4 arms, but everything else is the same with everybody. All these incredibly incredible dimensions. So I think he's used to those exercises that a lot of intelligent people get into, and they dive deep, and some of them do, because it exercises their brain. They need something like that to think about outside the box to help them to get that buzz they want when they're being smart. I don't know how to say it, so I don't sound like I'm bad mouthing them. I'm not bad mouthing them at all, but I think that's what's happened here. I think I want to say right out of the gate, I'm not so sure about anything from space at this point. Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, I mean, I think he'll tell us later on that space is not where he's going to place these ideas. He's got some new places to place things. So the ET element of it is potential. He's going to just distract us from our usual models around this. Look, wow, got to be disappointing. Got to be really annoying to be so highly cleared, and yet nobody really tell you anything. And that's got to be, I don't know, would you hold a grudge? He says he doesn't hold a grudge later on, but I think that's got to be pretty annoying. Somebody got this scholarship in physics, he's so highly cleared, and yet he's the kind of person who people won't really tell anything to, it would seem. And he uses articulation to really win the status, to really win the battle there. And we're going to find later on that in some areas he loses that articulation at a really key point about his story. Let's find out where that happens. Even with this articulation, which is kind of really annoying to be around, very annoying to be around that level of articulation. It lacks downward intonation on it. There's a lot more kind of upward intonation and articulated. So there's a lot of space for this story to grow in. How many, the interviewer asks about these craft, he says, well, quite a number. What does that mean, quite a number? What, more than 10? Less than 5? 100 or more? Quite a number? That could be anything. Why would somebody who is so clear and articulate, just give us quite a number. So no numbers there. They provided me documents and other proof, but around that we get repetition, we get eye block, we get concern, we get lip compression, and we get a vocal click on that. I don't expect to hear any or see any of those things if documents were provided and other proof. So you're saying the documents were proof of something, but what's the other proof? I mean, tell us. If there's other proof, tell us what the other proof is. Listen, I'm already finding him more than slightly annoying, and it's going to get worse. So if I have to duck out of this for a while and stick my head in a bucket of water, I may well have to do that. Let's see what else we got.
Hey, can I give you one data point? One thing to remember is he has an IG complaint, which protects him as a whistleblower, but his sources who disclose this stuff to him are not protected by that IG complaint. Mm-hmm. So he has to be very careful if he says something only Mark knew. Guess who? Mm-hmm. That's one of the things. So I'm going to give him benefit of a doubt there, but yeah, I'm with you.
You had the security classifications to go anywhere and ask anyone anything.
I had, based on my formal security clearance and multiple polygraphs, I had the ability to be read into any program that I needed. At one point in time, I was extremely highly cleared.
What conclusion did you come to at the end of your time on the UAP task force?
The UAP task force was refused access to a broad crash retrieval program.
When you say crash retrieval, what do you mean?
These are retrieving non-human origin technical vehicles, call it spacecraft if you will, non-human, exotic origin vehicles that have either landed or crashed.
We have spacecraft from another species.
We do, yeah.
How many?
Quite a number.
You're kidding.
No. I thought it was totally nuts, and I thought at first I was being deceived. It was a ruse. People started confiding in me. They approached me. I have plenty of current and former senior intelligence officers that came to me, many of which I knew almost my whole career, that confided in me they were a part of a program. They named the program. I've never heard of it. And they told me, based on their oral testimony, and they provided me documents and other proof, that there was, in fact, a program that the UAP task force was not read into.
You are alleging that the US government has been concealing the existence on this planet of alien life.
I would couch it as non-human intelligence, NHI, like we would like to say in our language.
Why do you say that? Why do you say NHI?
I don't want to necessarily denote origin. I don't think we have all the data to say, oh, they're coming from a certain location, and I couch it as somebody who studied physics, where maybe they're coming from a different physical dimension as described in quantum mechanics. We know there's extra dimensions due to high energy particle collisions, etc., and there's a theoretical framework to explain that. Yeah.
Just let me cut to the quick though. You're saying there is an intelligent species engaging with this planet?
Yes, that's potentially extraterrestrial, yeah.
I speak for everybody sitting at home. That is a shock.
It was to me, and I had a lot of sleepless nights.
You're not being paid for this interview?
No, I'm not.
Why are you doing this?
It's a sense of service, Call me a Boy Scout or whatever. It just, when I saw the kind of wrongdoing I did, I don't want to be 60, 70 years old in the future and have that, coulda, shoulda, woulda kind of feeling where I could have made a difference. I did not want to live a life of regret.
You are saying to the human race, for the first time, an official intelligence representative at a high level from the US government is saying publicly, we are not alone.
We're definitely not alone. Absolutely, the data points empirically that we're not alone, yeah.
You've said that the United States has spacecraft, intact craft.
We do.
Do we have bodies? Do we have species of
Well, naturally, when you recover something that's either landed or crashed, sometimes you encounter dead pilots. And believe it or not, as fantastical as that sounds, it's true.
Have you seen spacecraft?
I've seen some interesting photos and I've read some very interesting reports.
All right, Chase, what do you got?
So his regular behavior is already scientifically what I would call super strange. It's potentially some spectrum involvement here, but it's mixed with what I think might be this desire to be larger than life. And this is going to play out in a way that I think you might not expect. And I think there's an element of maybe stagecraft here. And Mark, I would love to hear your take on this. It's almost as if he's performing, which would mean that he's being deceptive, not being deceptive necessarily, but maybe he's acting out some kind of a role. And you see his eyes close while he's saying the sense of service. And this closed eye talking is most common in Western countries when somebody's patting themselves on a back in like a pretentious manner while they're trying to make it look humble. And the example is always I give that's when you ask your neighbor why they bought some solar panels for their house or an electric car, and they go, oh, well, it's good for the environment. You see the same exact behavior. He uses the left side of his body to talk about negative stuff. And this is spot on throughout the video. And you'll see this again. So this is going to come up later. So he uses this side when he's speaking about something negative, and that'll come up in a minute. There's a weird upward lilt in his voice in just unusual places. It's almost as if he uses the lilt instead of a head nod or something to accentuate stuff in his speech that he thinks is important. I think this is a normal way of being for him, and I bet good money he was in theater and has a natural dramatic flair in his voice. We also heard him use these weird tone shifts when he's discussing information that we know to be true, which is how we try to establish a behavioral baseline. I can imagine him using the same tone in his kitchen, asking somebody if they want a cocktail or a glass of water or something. That he admits the U.S. having intact craft and spacecraft, but the interviewer didn't specify the origin of that craft. NASA has spacecraft that are intact, as I'm aware. So that's a true statement. And when he's asked about the bodies, he's uncomfortable. And he uses a hypothetical scenario to escape the question instead of answering. And if you listen again, he could easily, in his mind, be speaking about recovering any crashed aircraft. So seeing interesting photos and reading interesting reports is not conclusive or even hinting at them being official. And if you're watching this video here with us, you have also seen interesting photos and interesting reports if you spend time on Reddit reading about UFOs. Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, first of all, Chase, do you have bodies in your closet?
No.
Yeah, exactly. No. Yes or no is the answer. Not, hey, sometimes when you're stumbling around in the dark, you find a body and you put it in your closet. That's kind of what he said. And look, that is a yes-no question. Now, you can qualify that yes or no and say why you know it. Let me tell you that also in the intelligence business, this is not an intelligence interview. This is a sensational interview that these guys are doing because it's entertaining. Whether it's true or not is another story. That we're not going to tell you yet what we think. But look, as you interrogate and somebody says, I heard that from someone else, that's called hearsay, and it's caveated in your reporting. It's been a long time since I've written an intelligence report, but you caveat that hearsay and you say, who told you? When did they tell you? And how did they know? That's an important part of how you report intelligence. I would have asked him, hey, how did you know? I would have gone down that thing. Here's the first really big lip compression to me and fading facts. When he says you're not alone, he goes, yeah. And he really compresses. Let me give you a third reason, because we say compressing your lips is often controlling or containing information. And I'll say often emotion. When people are very emotional, they'll do it. Another time is to suppress a smile. So let's pay attention, because if I'm afraid I'm going to smile, I may go to control it as well. Let's pay attention to him very closely. I love that you brought up the closed eye talking, Chase, because I had Chase's closed eye talking right here. His amused upper face at the time he's doing that compressed lip, look at his eyes are almost smiling, makes me concerned that the lip compression is more than simply withholding information. Do we have bodies? Yes. That's a yes or no question. Come on. There's a brand new head wobble that we haven't seen yet on 3 axis. Not the normal. He's doing pitch roll and yaw with his head as he conditions, believe it or not, fantastic, Let's look for that again. And then at the end, when he says it's true, he does a request for approval. All that feels awfully awkward from what we've seen. I agree with you, Chase. There's somewhat of an act here. But let me also tell you that when you resist interrogation, there's somewhat of an act to who you are, because you're trying not to project enough information for them to get a hold of you. It's kind of a Teflon thing. He said, I've seen enough. I'll leave that one alone because you said exactly what I do. All of us have seen reports and seen photos and read things. There's a lilt at the end as he says that, as he finishes up. When he says, I have seen photos and read reports, there's a lilt. That's a source lead. And if I were interrogating him, I'd say, okay, tell me where. Tell me what you saw. Tell me when. And force him to get to the point where he does the age-old, I can't tell you. That's when you are pushing a guy. Literally, when a guy's cleared, Chase, if I push you on a hot topic, you get to a point you find a way around it. You don't keep answering questions, or you simply say, I can't talk about that. And that's what people do. Now, you get the guy who says, the age-old thing, if I tell you I'd have to kill you. We all know that's BS, but that's just the way people are. The next question would be for me, what did you see? Where did you see it? Look, and why, if you were this important, why didn't you see the real thing instead of pictures? Why? I'd poke him. Look, I know that this guy was in the program according to what the vetting has been done by the news network, and these guys are pretty credible. So you'd hope they checked his background. Mark, what do you got?
Well, not a lot else other than to concur with what you said, because this one's a little bit of a simple one, isn't it? Yes, Chase, absolutely. We got the closed eye talking there. I had it as well. To the idea of that he's acting, there is an act going on. I think you're right. And I think that what I would call the mugging that we're seeing, which is the overemphasis in the face of certain feelings, I think that's about him playing a role, and I think it's a moral role. I think it's virtue signaling. I think he's playing the role of I'm a moral hero in this situation. I think further on we'll find out who he believes is, or what he believes is immoral, and what he's on the crusade, the moral crusade against. But look, if he is wanting to live this incredible life of being more moral than everybody else and not living any regret, as he says, he's not really on the edge of his seat around that. I mean, somebody who's taking this moment to go, this is my moment to do the opposite of what most other people have done and do the right thing. He's really laid back and relaxed around that, and a little bit protected as well in a relaxed way around that. It doesn't seem to have the entropy that I would think it should have for somebody who's on that kind of real crusade. Again, to your point, Greg, do we have bodies? The answer should be yes or no. It's really simple. Yes, no. But he becomes, Scott, one of your phrases here, he becomes the mayor of Qualifier Town around this. I've never seen so many qualifications as to how you can maneuver around a yes or no answer around this. 2 for 2, still an incredibly annoying individual. Scott, what do you got?
Okay. Yeah, I agree with you. And you're right. He needs a reason to be doing this. And what he said, his whole thing on the base of this whole thing is ethics and morality. That's what he brings up almost at the end of, as often as he's doing, as we're seeing compressed lips, we're seeing stress mouth at the end where his lips are doing that. We hear him talk about ethics and morality. So that's what he's basing the whole thing on. And so if he has been trained to do this, if this is a show, like that's the gut feeling I have. He's on a mission here to say specific things, to get specific information out. I think that might be what we're taking a look at here. The questions are basically the same. I mean, it's just, again, so they're aliens, they're people from outer space. What's going on? Where are they from? I got to ask you. He's asking the same questions. It's the same thing over and over with the guy asking questions. He's not getting the answers he wants, or set up the way he wants them. He's getting the idea. Sorry, they'll bug in here. But he's not getting the answer he wants. And he does say there are dead and alive pilots. So he's confirming there's something has been here.
No, he says pilots, just pilots. He does not say what kind.
Oh, he doesn't say
alien pilots. He doesn't say alien pilots.
No, I'm saying is dead and alive pilot. There are pilots.
We've got a bunch of them here in the country.
Oh yeah, I know. Oh yeah, I agree with that. But okay, I think then maybe it's the presentation of it that's making us think it's dead alien pilots. That's the concept.
It's the framework. Yeah. It's the framework. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I see what you're saying. You and I are going to agree so hard on this thing, Chase. It's ridiculous because I know where you're going with this. I am too.
You think so?
Oh, I think so. I think so, man.
I've got a good rap.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's see. Then after his little ethics speech there, we hear him going to fading facts. It gets kind of quiet there. So I think this may not be the true reason he's doing it, which I really don't think it is. Which would go back to my wrap up at the end. I'll talk about that. Then again, he's asking about the existence of aliens, and he says we are not alone. So he's confirming that there's something. But he doesn't say they're from space. He says he's already said they're from this, most likely from this other dimension. And a little while we'll hear him contradict that. But I'll wait for that. Okay, we good?
Yeah.
All right.
You're not being paid for this interview?
No, I'm not.
Why are you doing this?
It's a sense of service, Call me a Boy Scout or whatever. It just when I saw the kind of wrongdoing I did, I don't want to be 60, 70 years old in the future and have that, coulda, shoulda, woulda kind of feeling where I could have made a difference. I do not want to live a life of regret.
You are saying to the human race, for the first time, an official intelligence representative at a high level from the US government is saying publicly, we are not alone.
We're definitely not alone. Absolutely, the data points empirically that we're not alone, yeah.
You've said that the United States has spacecraft, intact craft.
We do.
Do we have bodies? Do we have species of
Well, naturally, when you recover something that's either landed or crashed, sometimes you encounter dead pilots. And believe it or not, as fantastical as that sounds, it's true.
Have you seen spacecraft?
I've seen some interesting photos and I've read some very interesting reports.
Let's deal with the issue of your credibility. Mm-hmm. Why should we believe you? You're just somebody coming out of nowhere, making claims that we really ultimately can't prove.
Yeah. Well, we provided the proof internally to the Inspector General and the Hill staff, and we went into all the details. I mean, I have the credentials. I was an intelligence officer on the UAP task force.
But let's face it, allegations of aliens and their spacecraft are hard to accept, even coming from a respected insider. Even if you call them NHI and UAP, how could such NHI travel to Earth in the first place and go undetected by the general public? Grusch says the craft may not be travelling through space as we understand it.
It is a well-established fact, at least mathematically and based on empirical observation and analysis, that there most likely are physical additional spatial dimensions. And you could imagine in 4 and 5D space where what we experience as linear time ends up being a physical dimension in higher dimensional space, where if you were living there, you could translate across what we perceive as a linear flow. So there is a possibility that, and this is a theory here, I'm not saying this is 100% the case, but it could be that this is not necessarily extraterrestrial, and it's actually coming from a higher dimensional physical space that might be co-located, right here.
All right, Mark, what do you got?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I love that intake of breath there. That's fully out of baseline as he goes into fudging the category of ET into NHI, non-human intelligence. So he's already pushing our categorization. He's a real postmodernist, this guy. He's pushing our categorization so we won't have anything really to hold on to, our usual ideas, which is going to cause him to slip up in the end, because he's going to go back to some usual physics idea. I get your point, Scott, that he's apparently studied a bit of physics. Probably could have studied more because pretty rudimentary the way he goes with it, and also tripping over his own fudging of categories there. What I love and you know me, I love an Australian. I love an Australian interviewer. We're great fans of Liam, I think it is, on not Ian, Liam, on I think Channel 7, I think it is. Anyway, this guy's great as well. I loved it in the first video where he says, "You're kidding, you're kidding." He really calls it on that. He goes, "You're kidding. You're making this up, aren't you?" Well, he's got the look in this video of an adult that's watching an 8-year-old tell stories. There's this real kind of pleasure, slight pleasure on his face as he listens and listens to this wild story happening, mildly wild story happening, evolve and evolve and evolve. And he kind of, pushes him along, ekes him along, kind of teases him along. 3 for 3, still quite an annoying individual. Greg, what do you got on this one?
Yeah, what I love about this, and when I first heard him ask the question, I was like, why the hell would you ask a conjecture question? And I thought, because what you're doing is allowing this guy to give you his opinion, which he does a lot in this show, but it's brilliant because what happens, and I don't know that the interviewer intentionally did something brilliant, but he does something brilliant. You get this guy now to look at his baseline. My guess is this is him in his living room talking to people. Look at all the hand movement. Look at all the facial expressions. Everything changes. If you look at it, here's the body language of him persuading in his opinion. So let's mark it and see what he does when he does it again. When he's in factual and telling, I'm an intelligence officer on the UAP task force, downward telling. That he's got rambling filler words as he thinks and his hands are doing the work while his brain is doing the work. In fact, at least observationally, blah, 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 before he gets to a word because he's thinking. He's got great congruency of message because his body is talking as his brain is talking. There's a lot of eye accessing as he thinks about what he's saying instead of riveted eye contact and romancer. He's creating an answer. He looks down. It's not internal voice. It's just him creating the right answer to answer the question. And then he draws his head back and keeps his eyes contacting and does that pulling taffy move. Are you with me? Are you with me? Are you with me? As he looks under his brow. When he does that telling of it's just a theory, his brow goes up and that's, do you get me? I would expect, look, if I tomorrow saw a whole bunch of UFOs and had documented evidence, I'd have a hell of a lot of passion around saying, hey guys, here's what I know and here's a fact. And I'd have a lot more passion than this guy does when he's telling us about reading reports and that. But he's got a hell of a lot of passion and a lot of body movement, a lot of body narration, as you would call it, Chase, when he's talking about his opinion. Scott, what do you got?
All right. That big old deep breath before he starts answering, Mark, I agree with you. He's ready for that. I think he said it so many times, he's almost bored with it because he's like, and as he starts talking, because it's the top of it, it's almost like a yawn. So I think that might bore him a little bit. But now he's suggesting the aliens came from another dimension on Earth. And they're alongside us, but we can't see them, And he says this is just a theory. But before he talked about how the math and all those things proved that they were true, and he says as it's a fact. So this is where it's starting to bug me because he's contradicting himself. He's saying it is one thing, and this is a fact. He's saying, this is just a theory. They came from one of these things. But before he said they most likely came from another dimension. So it sounds like, I'm just saying this because that's what it sounds like to me. It sounds like this cat's been doing a lot of mushrooms or something, because I remember at Berkeley, when these guys would do mushrooms, they'd sit around and talk about other dimensions and stuff like that all the time. That's what they'd get into. And it just, it's just starting to sound a bit odd. His body language really hasn't changed a whole lot in this. His voice tone, volume, and his cadence, everything seems to be the same. He's going right along with that same personality and that lilt in there, almost like a child. Really big facial expressions, a lot of huge mouth and eye movement. So I think he's prepared for all this, and I think it shows. It's showing something's up here. He's got a plan that he's following. I think you guys are right about that. I think there's something up here. Chase, what do you got?
Yeah, there's a tiny flash of anger on his face when he says they provided this proof. And I don't think this is him being angry at the interviewer. I think it's either a feeling of superiority, and he's angry that somebody wouldn't answer that question, or somebody would ask him that, or that he's angry the Inspector General didn't make the proof public yet. And Scott, to kind of roll into this, what you were talking about, as he's describing this, there are a few hallmarks that indicate this is what he truly believes, and he doesn't want to publicly say it. He calls it a well-established fact and gives it credibility. His confidence spikes. His gestures are more animated as he starts to describe this theory. And when he's talking about 4 and 5 dimensional space, his eyes move to the lower right. We typically look down this way when we're thinking about something that's emotional, something we're really passionate about. And this is a theory. I'm not saying this is 100% true. I think that's what he said, or 100% the case. And this shows us he likely believes it is the most likely case. And he's gesturing to his right side to talk about all of this. This is where he uses positive gestures. Over here, he's using his right side. So to sum this up, I'm going to give you a quote from Interstellar, where they are in this 4-dimensional tesseract. And there's this robot named TARS, I think, in the movie, with Matthew McConaughey floating in this black hole. And the robot says to Matthew McConaughey, he says, humans couldn't build this. And McConaughey replies, not yet. I believe David thinks these are humans, but not from here. And if, in fact, he believes this at all, we're going to see more of it in just a second. That's all.
Maybe we're not going down the same road.
We're not.
We are.
One of those tape replays.
Let's deal with the issue of your credibility.
Mm-hmm.
Why should we believe you? You're just somebody coming out of nowhere, making claims that we really ultimately can't prove.
Yeah. Well, we provided the proof internally to the Inspector General and the Hill staff, and we went into all the details. I mean, I have the credentials. I was an intelligence officer on the UAP task force.
But let's face it, allegations of aliens and their spacecraft are hard to accept, even coming from a respected insider. Even if you call them NHI and UAP, how could such NHI travel to Earth in the first place and go undetected by the general public? Grusch says the craft may not be travelling through space as we understand it.
It is a well-established fact, at least mathematically and based on empirical observation and analysis, that there most likely are physical additional spatial dimensions. And you could imagine in 4 and 5D space where what we experience as linear time ends up being a physical dimension in higher dimensional space, where if you were living there, you could translate across what we perceive as a linear flow. So there is a possibility that, and this is a theory here, I'm not saying this is 100% the case, but it could be that this is not necessarily extraterrestrial, and it's actually coming from a higher dimensional physical space that might be co-located, right here.
What can you tell me about these craft, these technologies? Why do you know it's exotic?
Based on the very specific properties that I was briefed on, isotopic ratios that would have to be engineered for it to be at those levels, but also just extremely strange, heavy atomic metal, high up in the periodic table arrangements that we don't understand, what the emergent properties are, but there's just a very strange mix of elements.
So you're absolutely sure that the materials that these craft are made of are clearly not of this Earth?
Yeah, they're sophisticatedly engineered, certainly not by humans.
And while Grusch says the US has gleaned some insight from these materials for military use, so much more could be done if academia and the private sector had access.
It's totally nuts that humanity as a whole, especially the U.S. citizenry as a whole, they're not even benefiting from broad research on this to solve propulsion, energy issues, novel material science that can improve people's quality of life. It's just totally nuts how it's been protected and inhibits progress.
If you're right, if you're telling us the truth, everyone, the entire American public, has been lied to for decades.
Yeah, there's a sophisticated disinformation campaign targeting the U.S. populace, which is extremely unethical and immoral.
All right, Greg, what do you got?
So he starts to bump into giving away some intelligence. The minute you start talking about facts about what is in a program, like, for example, kinds of metals, that kind of stuff, you're now disclosing intelligence, because that stuff, if nobody else knows, it's intelligence. But he's not going into statistics. He's not talking about what exactly he saw. He's just using words. He's not using words. He's using language, a lot of language that has no meaning and no content. So as you listen to him, listen for language without content. These words he's using, like isotopic ratios. Okay, what were they? You're going to bring it up. What were they? Give me some numbers. Tell me what that is. Then he says hard facts on the periodic table, or he says high numbers on the periodic table. Even Bob Lazar gave us a number. Come on, man, we can make that up. It's 269, whatever number you want to make up. But he doesn't. He doesn't give us any numbers. And if he's a physicist, he would probably know that number and would remember it. I'm questioning anytime I hear somebody bump up against something and they're using the language of but no content. It makes me uncomfortable, because guess who uses that? Disinformation campaigns use that, because what they do is they blast out language with no content, and then you can't prove or disprove what they say. It's powerful, it's a tool, it's what we do. And now he drops to internal voice in a heavy way. Well, if I'm navigating language, I'm going to drop to an internal voice. I would have said, look, man, what were you briefed on? You tell me exactly what you briefed on, and push him until he said, I can't tell you. Then I said, okay, we'll leave that alone. We'll move to a new one. If you ask me these same questions, I can answer everything this guy has done today. Everything he said, I could answer, because I don't know much about physics except for periodic table has no end. We just haven't found everything on it, to your point about Matthew McConaughey, and not yet. We just don't know what's there. There's no content, a lot of jargon, and then there's a lip compression again at a strange mix of elements. And I think that's because he ran out of words and needed to stop. Here's he's talking about, when he starts talking about normal stuff, when he's talking about progress in that, watch again, no eye contact. He's thinking, his brain is working and he's moving away. But when you ask him a hard question, there's riveted eye contact. That makes me uncomfortable. The interrogator in me goes, my bullshit meter is pegged when you do that. I'm uncomfortable. Then his head goes back, and he's got an RFA, a request for approval, as his brow goes up as he says the word disinformation campaign, and a little distaste in his mouth. You got my attention. Chase, what do you got?
You guys took all the good stuff. Sorry about that Interstellar thing earlier. If you're watching, it just happens to be my favorite movie of all time. And I think that's what he was describing. But when he says certainly not by humans, there's lip compression, and it's different than his normal lip compression, because these muscles right here, the sternocleidomastoid muscles, and there's pre-swallow movement. Right before the camera cuts, you can see that. I think he disagrees with the statement. And whether it's your statement or somebody else's, you can use this technique anywhere when you start seeing things like that, especially the lip compression. And then he says there's a strange mix of elements. He's showing more disagreement on his face here than at any other time in the interview, as far as I could see. There's lip compression with horizontal lip retraction, which is a little bit different. That starts to indicate some fear starting to creep in there. Then the head goes backward, like this head withdrawal. Greg, I think you were talking about that. And there's finally emotional accessing, some down right movement, and his baseline is to move down left. And he's either holding something huge back here, which might be the case, or he disagrees with this pretty strongly, which it tends to look more like from my experience. And in the case that he disagrees with what he's saying, this would point even closer to the possibility that he's acting and doing this as some kind of a performance, but with a script maybe written by somebody else. It's interesting so far, but let's look at the rest to see if we can confirm that or not. But when he says disinformation campaign, it shows contempt a little bit on his face. But one huge thing here is the use of the word sophisticated to describe the disinformation campaign. It's the identical word he used to describe these awesome spacecraft, which he holds in such high regards as to risk his reputation for. The same word. This is not common. When somebody respects something, they do not use the same words to describe something they don't like, almost ever. This is a big deal, and that word being used with disinformation campaign is pretty strange here, and we might see some more of that coming up. Scott?
All right, great. Now let's talk about that, because that contempt comes between sophisticated and misinformation campaign. So there's something up there. Then he goes right into that whole thing about ethics again. That the whole thing he's squatted on about ethics and morality. He goes back to that. So we may be going down the same road, Chase. I think maybe. So again, all this is hearsay. He's not showing it. He hasn't really seen much. He hasn't seen anything. He hasn't said, well, I saw this or I saw that. He says he saw some videos, but he's not seeing any of these, whatever it is, these non-human beings. He hasn't seen anything. All these people have just come and talked to him about it out of nowhere, just started telling him about it. Then he goes back into that, when he goes back into that high-end talk about physics and all that stuff, he's just making it so it's okay. That is a jumbling thing where it sort of mixes stuff up. So then he comes back out, so you will trust what he's saying and believe he's smarter than you, but you just got to trust him on this. I know what that looks like. I see that all the time, because someone who thinks they're really smart and they try to throw in all this jargon, like the same thing you were saying earlier, Greg, all this stuff going on, but it really doesn't mean much. And like you're saying, Mark, there's not a lot of depth to it, but it sounds like a whole lot's going on there. You know, if you were going to be trying to get something across to the masses, you could do that and be okay, because there are a whole lot of people out there that aren't the smartest people in the whole wide world, and then there's that bunch of people up here who are pretty smart, but there's more that aren't than that are. So when it comes to accepting information as a whole, as an entire group, it's more likely to be accepted by, since there are more people that would accept it in that group than wouldn't accept it. I'm trying not to give away my ending. And we're still seeing a lot of micro expressions of fear and anxiety. So this is getting, as horrifically boring as this is excruciating. It's really interesting and fascinating as far as facial expressions go, if you're into micro expressions. Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, this is so annoying. So here's my gut instinct on this, because I'd sit day after day in a lot of rooms with analysts, or on video with analysts. I listen to a lot of analysts. And the moment you get somebody like this in the room is the moment where you send a message and you go, get this one out. Like, this is literally a waste of our space-time continuum. So it's, just an utter waste of time from moment one. I was told, he said, utter hearsay. From moment one, he's just gone, hearsay. All right, get him out the room. No point in this. 0 point in this. Get him out the room. He's expending so much energy on concern, on lip compression, on eye blocks, on, pushing forward with the lips. And then, to your point, Chase, tightening out the mouth into a full Wallace and Gromit fear. And I'm not sure it's because exactly that, Chase. I think those are mugged expressions. I think those are acted expressions, and could be due to neurotype. Could be because I think there could be something there in his neurology that means he maybe doesn't know the feelings but has seen them and wants to display them. Or could be just a simple act of, I need to put a lot of energy into this to show people just how complex and concerning and like, incredible, and believe it or not, this is. Well, no, but I don't, even if I wanted to believe it, I can't listen to you as an analyst. There is nothing that you're doing right now that would make me give up my time to watch anymore. So I totally understand. If that is his demeanor, how he could be given clearances and nobody want to talk to him. Nobody want to go, well, you got the clearance, and let's open up the door. Let's let you behind the real door. I wouldn't let him through my front door. What a total pedant. What a total waste of time he is. Anyway, that's just my opinion. Let's have another video.
Dang, Mark.
That's a good one, Mark.
What an annoying
this guy.
What an annoying. He wouldn't last 5 minutes.
One of those tape replays.
What can you tell me about these craft, these technologies? Why do you know it's exotic?
Based on the very specific properties that I was briefed on, isotopic ratios that would have to be engineered for it to be at those levels, but also just extremely strange, heavy atomic metal, high up in the periodic table arrangements that we don't understand, what the emergent properties are, but there's just a very strange mix of elements.
So you're absolutely sure that the materials that these craft are made of are clearly not of this earth?
Yeah, they're sophisticatedly engineered, certainly not by humans.
And while Grusch says the US has gleaned some insight from these materials for military use, so much more could be done if academia and the private sector had access.
It's totally nuts that humanity as a whole, especially the U.S. citizenry as a whole, they're not even benefiting from broad research on this to solve propulsion, energy issues, novel material science that can improve people's quality of life. It's just totally nuts how it's been protected and inhibits progress.
If you're right, if you're telling us the truth, everyone, the entire American public, has been lied to for decades.
Yeah, there's a sophisticated disinformation campaign targeting the U.S. populace, which is extremely unethical and immoral.
In 1947, an object crashed in the New Mexico desert near the town of Roswell. The Air Force recovered material described as metallic and rubbery, though the government changed its story as to what it was, calling it a flying disc at first, then a weather or spy balloon.
It just read ridiculous to me that the US Air Force had changed its story.
Yeah, and they added additional elements over time and tried to conflate additional programs to explain some of the events.
Why are these things crashing?
Yeah, some are landed, some are crashed, and I think that's an interesting discussion that's come up, as advanced as, we are, as humans, right? Planes crash, cars crash. Just because you're some advanced sentience that has advanced technology doesn't mean some small percentage of your, I'll use the Air Force term like sorties, meet an unfortunate operational conclusion, as we might want to say.
Most people would tell you the Roswell incident has been thoroughly debunked. In fact, the Air Force published this report in 1994 to put the issue to rest once and for all. Grusch has read it.
That analysis I did was a total hack job, and even anybody with analytical skills, if you read it, you can deduce that they're conflating multiple situations with crash test dummies and mogul balloons, and they're just saying that the townsfolk who personally witnessed it were totally imagining things. They concocted that whole report just to disinform.
All right, Chase, what do you got?
There is one thing, and pretty much one thing only here, that really shook me the moment I saw it. The most of this clip, behavior that is suggestive here, is just based on his baseline in this context of what I think is probably truth-telling. Mostly kind of fluid, weird cadence, which is his baseline. Tone, pitch, volume, pretty semi-normal. Still has the normal weird spikes in his tone that might point to acting or being on stage. And it all goes well until the end. The precise moment. And it's at the final, quarter second of this clip when he says the word disinform. He displays the most powerful lip compression here with a really strong chin boss movement. This is this muscle right here. We associate this muscle, which is like a little triangle muscle in the chin. It's called the mentalis, with grief or quite often shame. And this is well researched by people like Dr. Paul Ekman. I've developed a lot of our modern understanding, and even Paul Ekman based a ton of his work on this Swedish anatomist guy named Carl Herman Hjortshow. So we're seeing some kind of grief or shame here, absolutely. But the tricky part is that we can't see the whole body. Distinguishing between grief and shame is difficult, but I think there is some kind of grief here. Shame, you're a little bit more likely, slightly more likely to see the chin drop when shame happens. as opposed to the grief. That's all I got for this one here. But there's something around that word, disinform. Mark?
Yeah, interesting you mentioned that. We don't confer before this. We don't compare notes. We just get into this. My note here is now he's letting us know what to look out for in a disinformation story. He tells us that you should look out for conflation, concoction, and imagination. Conflation, melding one thing with another. Concoction, just the creation of something out of forms that are already there, mixed together. And then imagination, something out of nowhere. And if you have the analytic skill, you can deduce that it's when disinformation is going on. He says, look, with the analytic skill, you'd be able to see if this were disinformation, and tells us exactly what to look out for. There's one other thing that comes across here, which is just because you are intelligent does not mean that some percentage reach an unfortunate operational conclusion. And I think that is apropos for him. Just because you are, and I've seen it time and time again, just because you're super smart and you're an analyst and you have clearance, and it doesn't mean that you're not going to crash the craft. Doesn't mean that you're not going to reach a conclusion that is not factual or reasonable or what the real conclusion should be. So let's never think that just because this guy, may have awards, may have been given clearances, may well have got scholarships. And, I've met a lot of intelligent people who can't be allowed to cross the road. So, watch out for that. Just because he's smart doesn't mean he can't make horrific mistakes. That's all I got on that one. Scott, what do you got?
All right. The expression of fear after yeah, and there's one before some are landed. So, and the fear he's showing is when he goes like that, his lips come out like that. It's a version of fear. So we're not seeing the frozen part of it. We're seeing these little micro expressions of fear at the oddest times. And I agree with you, Chase. We're seeing some really interesting fear, anger, grief. There's a whole lot going on here. And I think it's because he may be saying one thing, but he's been told not to say this because he doesn't feel the thing he's saying. He feels something else. So maybe that's part of it. And then you've got the part where he does know a whole lot about something where somebody got killed or something. But then again, like Greg always says, maybe he's using that as the example so he can refer back to that, but couch it as aliens or whatever it is that crashed or wherever the pilots are from, that type of thing. But then when he talks about the crash, he's got this lilting in his voice. And then he reroutes away from that. He's great at staying away from the answers, from answering the questions he's being asked. And I know I always bring these kind of things up. It comes from when I was in the music business and from engineering tons of records and producing tons of records. I can hear things that pop out at me. And this is what I thought was fascinating. I thought this is where you were going, Chase. But when he says, when he's talking about the crash, and he said the analysis they did was a total hack job. So what happened was they cut when he said what the analysis they did, and then he says it was a total hack job. There's space between there. Something else happened and enough time, enough space to make the emotions change in there. You can hear the edit. You can hear them stick did and it together. They did a good job. I'm not complaining about whoever edited that if you're watching. You did a fantastic job of it. However, you can still hear that edit there. You did cover it with a video, so we couldn't see his mouth or see the change in the video. But if you had crossfade those a little bit tighter, it wouldn't have been there. But listen to how the voice sounds normal. Then it goes to an entirely different emotion. It's quieter. The voice is really strong up here. The volume is good. The cadence is cutting right along at a pretty good speed. And then the tone changes and it gets lower. And his delivery is a little softer and his cadence slows down. So in that one sentence there, we're hearing them edit it. What it means, I don't know. It may not mean anything. It may just have been editing for time, but I don't think they should have done that. Or they had a problem, a glitch somewhere in the video or something. But there's that to put in there. So that makes me a little bit suspicious. I don't think they're that News Nation is in with this guy. I'm just saying the editing there was a little iffy. Great job, but it's still, you can tell something's up there. Chase, what do you got?
Me.
Or is it Greg? I knew it was one of you guys.
Yeah. So his yes increase a lot here, and his tone has changed. If you hear the way he's talking, his tone has increased dramatically. I'm going to add one more thing. Chase, we saw the same thing. This compression with the chin boss, I don't think it is grief. I think it is containment. Look at his upper face. Look how his upper face looks amused when he's talking, but his lower face doesn't match. Try, everybody sitting there, start smiling and try to control it and watch what happens. You're going to bring up your chin boss. While your chin boss is not something you automatically control, when you're trying to think of ways to control things, watch what happens. And he says it as at a key point, at disinformation. That is an important data point, in my opinion, from everything we've seen to now.
One of those tape replays.
In 1947, an object crashed in the New Mexico desert near the town of Roswell. The Air Force recovered material described as metallic and rubbery, though the government changed its story as to what it was, calling it a flying disc at first, then a weather or spy balloon. It just read ridiculous to me that the US Air Force had changed its story.
Yeah, and they added additional elements over time and tried to conflate additional programs to explain some of the events.
Why are these things crashing?
Yeah, some are landed, some are crashed, and I think that's an interesting discussion that's come up, as advanced as, we are, as humans, right? Planes crash, cars crash. Just because you're some advanced sentience that has advanced technology doesn't mean some small percentage of your, I'll use the Air Force term like sorties, meet an unfortunate operational conclusion, as we might want to say.
Most people would tell you the Roswell incident has been thoroughly debunked. In fact, the Air Force published this report in 1994 to put the issue to rest once and for all. Grusch has read it.
That analysis I did was a total hack job, and even anybody with analytical skills, if you read it, you can deduce that they're conflating multiple situations with crash test dummies and mogul balloons, and they're just saying that the townsfolk who personally witnessed it were totally imagining things. They concocted that whole report just to disinform.
So the reason for the secrecy exactly is what?
Feudalistic dominance, who can have both asymmetric technology for, it seems like, just fueling the war machine.
Grusch says that through the 50s and 60s, encounters with the NHI continued, as did the cover-up. One incident in 1967, about which multiple Air Force veterans have gone public, involved UAPs tampering with the nuclear missiles at Malmstrom Air Base in Montana.
They saw a craft, appearing to be intelligently controlled, hovered over a nuclear weapons silo and shut down 10 nuclear ICBM missiles.
Mm-hmm. It certainly looks like they want to understand how far we've advanced in our nuclear fizzle kind of technologies at the very least. I mean, it looks like preparatory probing activity. It might be innocent kind of scientific gathering, could be ISR probing.
Meanwhile, Grusch says the crash retrieval program continued. And while he won't reveal where the downed craft are stored, he does say that the people working with the technology have been putting themselves at risk.
A lot of them, were injured looking at some of this stuff. You can imagine the nuclear, radiological, and biological risk to looking at an unknown, and a lot of them have literally suffered physically because of their service.
But as we know, anyone who's come forward claiming non-human intelligence is behind these incidents has been dismissed as delusional or deliberately deceitful.
If you're right, if you're telling us the truth, everyone, the entire American public, has been lied to for decades.
Yeah, there's a sophisticated disinformation campaign targeting the U.S. populace, which is extremely unethical and immoral.
Mark, what do you got?
So he says, you can imagine the nuclear radiological risk. Yeah, I can imagine it. I mean, that's all we're doing, isn't it? We're just imagining it. We're just making stuff up. And yeah, I mean, I can imagine it because, you know, I've seen all of those videos about, you know, nuclear stuff going on, and I understand, you know, I went to school, you know, we studied all of that stuff. I've had nuclear material a distance from me, so I understand the risks of that. However, I thought we were talking about interdimensional travel. And so now what you're not explaining to me is how this kind of quantum interdimensional travel does have a nuclear radiological risk. Now it may do it may not, essentially. But you know, if you're so good at the science, just explain it, because you're explaining this new idea with some old ideas that we'd understand, but you're not filling in the gap in between. And he says, you know, it's beyond our comprehension. Well, why are you going for old style analogies if this is beyond our comprehension? Just say it can't be understood. There's no way that I can explain this to you, and I'm not going to do it with any old ideas that we have about physics, because they just won't fit. It just doesn't make any sense to any of that. Now, here's where it gets exciting for me, because there is a vocal click before his central message, which signals to me there's some change, there's something going on here. And that central message is the US government is extremely unethical and immoral. And so for me, this is the central agenda of what he now wants to put forward. The US government is unethical and immoral. That's why I think right at the start of that, he was doing this piece about this virtue signaling of, I'm just doing this for a moral crusade. And the villain of this is government, US government, some bigger entity, which is the opposite of what I am. Let's see how that story, that idea, trots along. Scott, what do you got on this one?
All right. We're seeing lots of head movement. He doesn't know what really the reason why they're doing it. He throws out a couple of things and says what he may think. And keep in mind, the Department of Defense has okayed everything he's said, because he wouldn't say anything he's not supposed to. That hasn't been okayed. He even says that. He says, I can't talk about this because it isn't cleared, those types of things. But everything he's telling us, the Department of Defense has said, yeah, you can say that. It's no big deal. Yeah, you can say whatever, say this about that. Don't say something else. So these things he's telling us aren't really big secrets. It's just stuff that's not out yet. Maybe this is a way to get that stuff out. And again, he ends the whole thing on ethics and being moral, that whole thing. But the thing that bugs me about this, and this goes back to what you're talking about as well, Mark, he says nuclear, not nuclear. Now, it doesn't sound like a big deal. A lot of people say nuclear. Yeah, a lot of people do. We talked about that group here and this group here. He's supposed to be in this group here, which is a whole lot smarter than this group down here. And he says nuclear. I'm from Oak Ridge, Tennessee. That's where they designed the nuclear warheads that we dropped on Japan. When I was in school, if you said nuclear, people would make fun of you, because people from out of town came in and did say nuclear every now and then, and we'd laugh at them and make fun of them. And they, to this day, we still make fun of him when I see him, or when we see him. Excuse me. So that doesn't happen. He shouldn't be saying nuclear. If he's a physicist and he's into nuclear power and understands. My father was a radiologist. He was the head of the radiology department here in Oak Ridge, chief of staff of the hospital. Never once did he say nuclear. Not once. I know George Bush said nuclear. President Bush said nuclear. So what? You don't say that. Another thing he says in a few minutes that's going to bug me squatless is et cetera. EX, cetera, et cetera. If he's this smart, why is he saying this? Why does he say nuclear and et cetera, when it's et cetera? I'm not being a snob about it. I'm just being, if this guy's so smart and he knows all this stuff, why is he talked like that? Getting on my last nerve. I'm with you, Mark. Let's hate on him. Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, not as much hate as you have. So yeah, he's not fishing. Look, he's asked another conjecture question. He's in his wheelhouse. He does what he does when he's asked conjecture. He does an eye lock. He starts moving around and talking. Anytime, if I ask you, Chase, what do you think those UFOs were doing over there? Well, hell, nobody knows. Anybody can make up something. And by the way, when you go to DOD to get clearance, Scott, they're not going to tell you everything you can and can't say. They're going to say, do not divulge classified, because you don't know what questions this knucklehead's going to ask. They're going to tell you, don't divulge classified information, boom, 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 boom. And they'll probably tell you some, decorum ways to behave, but they're not going to vet every question that these guys are sending you, most likely. Just depends. He does thumbs up when he's talking about this from folded hands. Joe Navarro says when your hands are steepled and you raise your thumbs, it's confidence. Well, he is confident in this thing because he's just asked a question. We still don't hear a single fact. Not one. We hear more broad terms. A lot of them have suffered physically. Well, like how? What kind of physically? They cut their thumbs off? They get radiation burns? They blow up? Something. If the guy has seen all this, I would ask just simple questions, but we don't get those. So we don't really know. This is just conjecture. That's all it is. Chase, what do you got?
Yeah, I agree. And I will tell you, the information is very compartmentalized. So when I first got my clearance, I was probably 21. I got on the computer, and there's a thing inside of the secret part of the internet called Intel Link. And it's like Google for secret stuff. I typed in JFK, aliens. I searched.
Oh, yeah, you'll find it. Yeah.
You can't find, it's not just like you can get access to whatever you want. What I thought that was how it worked. So when he's talking about people being injured, look at when he says, or looking at stuff, and he says stuff, there's some genuine, unrehearsed anger and some confusion on the face here. There's also some genuine non-rehearsed, I think, emotional eye accessing down and to the right, which also shows he feels something about this. And he also makes the most exaggerated facial expression of this whole interview when he's talking about them physically suffering. So if this is true, maybe he's channeling a memory of, if he's being deceptive, he could be channeling a memory of people getting hurt. If it's not true, this might be a talking point that he's been made to feel emotional about. And when he says ISR probing in here, that's not some alien probe technique. ISR is military speak for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. And I'm extremely familiar with this term. So there's that usage of sophisticated again when he's talking about this. And he used this to describe positive things first. This unusual usage of the word gives me super weird vibes about what his true feelings about a well-orchestrated disinformation campaign might be. Something is off here. And just to let you know, I've hit maybe the 30,000 hour mark in this field a long time ago. This is something you don't see happen on accident. People don't make the mistake of using the words they powerfully use to describe positive things when they use something negative. I'll just leave it at that. That's all I got.
Chase, you know what I did when I got my first clearance?
What?
I went to the binders. Give you an idea. There was no internet.
Yeah.
It's a long time ago.
What'd you find?
You've been around long enough to remember it.
Oh, yeah. No, I was, after computers came along, of course, I was on the net, of course. And yeah, you're dead on. People think they're going to go in. You might have the highest clearance level on Earth and go in and try to look up the program he's talking about. Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing. Because you need access and you need to be right onto the project and all that kind of stuff.
One of those tape replays.
The reason for the secrecy exactly is what?
Feudalistic dominance, who can have both asymmetric technology for, it seems like, just fueling the war machine.
Grusch says that through the 50s and 60s, encounters with the NHI continued, as did the cover-up. One incident in 1967, about which multiple Air Force veterans have gone public, involved UAPs tampering with the nuclear missiles at Malmstrom Air Base in Montana.
They saw a craft, appearing to be intelligently controlled, hovered over a nuclear weapons silo and shut down 10 nuclear ICBM missiles.
It certainly looks like they want to understand how far we've advanced in our nuclear fizzle kind of technologies at the very least. I mean, it looks like preparatory probing activity. It might be innocent kind of scientific gathering, could be ISR probing.
Meanwhile, Grusch says the crash retrieval program continued. And while he won't reveal where the downed craft are stored, he does say that the people working with the technology have been putting themselves at risk.
A lot of them, were injured looking at some of this stuff. You can imagine the nuclear, radiological, and biological risk to looking at an unknown unknown. And a lot of them have literally suffered physically because of their service.
But as we know, anyone who's come forward claiming non-human intelligence is behind these incidents has been dismissed as delusional or deliberately deceitful.
If you're right, if you're telling us the truth, everyone, the entire American public, has been lied to for decades.
Yeah, there's a sophisticated disinformation campaign targeting the U.S. populace, which is extremely unethical and immoral.
There's an industry of debunkers out there on the web who say, oh, they've got this all wrong, it's a jet exhaust at a distance, and the aircraft's turning. Give me an answer on that.
I had some optical engineering experts look at that, and the Raytheon AT FLIR system based on the pixel saturation and apparent size. It's certainly something that's not a jet. It might be some kind of natural phenomenon that's quite strange, but it's not as simple as a jet.
He has even stronger opinions about this UAP, now known to history as the Tic Tac, shot in 2004 in the Pacific by aviators off the USS Nimitz.
And the Tic Tac?
Truly anomalous, absolutely technical vehicle, physical, and that's absolutely something that we didn't make.
Not of this world.
Most likely, yeah.
All right. I don't have much, so I'll go first on this one. I've got one thing. When he says they're not of this world, and he says, most likely, yeah. He's contradicting himself. From before, he said, yeah, they're most likely from here in another dimension. But he said they're not from this world. He says, yeah, most likely not. So there we are again. Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, it's the same. So he says before that, absolutely something that we did not make. Absolutely something that we did not make. The interviewer says, not of this world. Well, a good answer would be exactly, not of this world, or yeah, not of this world, or no, not of this world. And he says, most likely, yeah. Well, that's inconclusive, isn't it? So annoying. What an annoying idiot. Anyway, he won't set his terms, and he won't discuss anything under anybody's terms. So he's annoying because you can't debate him in any way, because he will not define anything. And if you define something, he just moves outside of that definition. And so you can't pin him down. That's why I would immediately send him out of the room, either to have a think about himself, to go home, or that somebody might put him in a small box for a bit and then bring him back again when he's been made a little more uncomfortable with the situation. The whole thing's pointless because he's just this slippery squid, like one of those little alien squids that like just slippery, eelish squid. Greg, what do you got on this one?
Well, Mark, I think part of the reason you feel like he's a squid is because he's hiding something. Now, what he's hiding, I can't tell you, but I recognize hiding something. I've interrogated a boatload of people in my life, and that would I say there's a glass pane. They can appear to be as polite and friendly and helpful as they are, but if you interrogate enough people, you know that feeling when you walk in the room, and it takes you a while to understand. You got to break that glass. You got to get through it. You got to figure out how to work.
Explain the glass thing. Explain.
Yeah, and what I mean by glass is you can be sitting across from me and answering every question I ask and apparently helping me, and still lying through your teeth simply by avoiding giving details, by using language, by avoiding the ability for me to get a hold of you psychologically. And this guy is doing that with this guy. And what I mean by that is now the interviewer is also not aggressive and poking. For example, when he says, not of this world, well, how the hell do you know that? How do you know that? Just from that video, how do you know that? Somebody tell you that? How do you know? How could you tell? Well, give me the reasons why. But there's none of that. So the guy is doing exactly what I said in the beginning. He has to keep and appease the questioner. He's giving enough information to make the guy feel safe. And he's threshold thinking. Is the guy listening? Is he believing me? Now he's comfortable enough with the guy for the most part that he's comfortable saying things. This guy's not breaking the glass. He's not pushing through, and he's not going after him, not chasing him. The guy's a little uncomfortable, meaning our subject is a little uncomfortable because he does a chained elephant. He starts moving around. So we see some of that. When he says we didn't make this, he closes his eyes. That's when I would crawl on him and ask him questions about how do you know that? And he withdraws his lower jaw and his chin, which we usually associate with protecting self and that kind of thing. Well, that may not mean anything. However, it's a deviation from what we've seen here before. And I would like to see more. But that if you've ever been in an interrogation room, you would know exactly what I mean by it feels like there's a glass between you, because there's a feeling of that guy is saying everything right, but he's not divulging what he knows. He's not answering questions. And there's a lot of ways to protect that, and there's lots of reasons to protect it. Let me give you one possible reason with him. I said it earlier. While he is protected by an IG whistleblower complaint, the guys that told him this stuff, if he's in fact telling the truth, if Chase told me a bunch of stuff off his program that I'm not read onto, and I divulge that, guess what? I'm protected. Guess who isn't? So you got to be really careful. Now, the laws may change and things may change over time. I've been out of the system for 15 years, not been playing in the system in 15 years. But Chase, I would venture to say when you left, it was just like that. If you got covered and you're protected by that whistleblower, it's one thing. But all your friends behind the screen who told you that information, now there's a problem for them. So that might be part of the reason why I'm going to give them the benefit of a doubt here, because I have a very strong opinion, just like the others you do. Chase, what do you got?
So I think if I was running this thing, I would have had them go to a fake commercial break, and coming back from that break, as the interviewer, I'd look at the camera and say, and welcome back. We've got David here, who is a national hero, prepared to finally deliver the actual facts and secrets as a whistleblower. And I would pump his ego up about being a hero and giving out these facts. And then I would beat him over the head with that during the interview very covertly, and try to just get more info that way. But I want you to just pay attention to this. He's a whistleblower with inside information who's been involved in the deepest, most secretive access programs in the world. He has information about crafts, beings, materials of the crafts, where the crafts are even kept. Now listen to the video again. He's providing information that anyone, a 12-year-old who has watched YouTube could provide this information. He describes a flying saucer, whatever that thing is, as certainly something that's not a jet and might be some kind of natural phenomena that's quite strange. He describes the Tic Tac thing as truly anomalous, something we didn't make, physical, most likely not of this world. This is what anyone off the street would say. Just take a minute to process all of that with his knowledge and insider information on this entire program that he's worked for, allegedly, and you get an answer that sounds like ChatGPT version 2.
One of those tape replays.
There's an industry of debunkers out there on the web who say, oh, they've got this all wrong. It's a jet exhaust at a distance and the aircraft's turning. Give me an answer on that.
Well, I had some optical engineering experts look at that, and the Raytheon AT FLIR system based on the pixel saturation and apparent size. It's certainly something that's not a jet. It might be some kind of natural phenomenon that's quite strange, but it's not as simple as a jet.
He has even stronger opinions about this UAP, now known to history as the Tic Tac, shot in 2004 in the Pacific by aviators off the USS Nimitz.
And the Tic Tac?
Truly anomalous, absolutely technical vehicle, physical, and that's absolutely something that we didn't make.
Not of this world.
Most likely, yeah. There are many videos that are totally fair to release through a declassification process. And I find it very concerning from a transparency perspective that all that the department has declassified were those 3 famous videos. There are more concerning videos that left me with a lot of questions, yeah.
He says there are credible witnesses who could testify to Congress about spacecraft, big spacecraft.
A lot of them were very large, yeah. Like a football field kind of size. And I remember interviewing these personnel. I'm like, either these people are lying to me, they're having a psychotic break, or this is some crazy but true stuff that's happening, and I have no good explanation. It's prosaic, at all for this, because this is not explainable by, swamp gas, St. Elmo's fire, ball lightning, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this is like tangible technical craft they're seeing up close and personal in some cases when I interview people.
And at the centre of it all, the crash retrieval program the government has never publicly acknowledged. A program, Grusch says, that's included at least one private aerospace company that is storing alien craft. Is that true?
That is how a lot of these relationships are. While I don't want to name the specific companies and government elements, but overall, the government has been the custodian of a lot of this, right? And they'll hand receipt it out to a cleared defense contractor to do some analysis, which I find highly unethical. You have basically a sole source arrangement, and you allow certain private corporate elements to look at this, develop a potential insight, and then sell it back to the government for profit. And I think that's totally unethical.
Mark, what do you got?
Okay, I've got concern, I've got targeting, I've got a sense of distrust. I get that from a downward, one-sided frown from him, and disgust around the government is not transparent. So there seems to be this building up, again, of something immoral. The government is not transparent. He himself, I assume, is the opposite. I assume he's very transparent, though we don't seem to have got any information out of him that we couldn't have just got out of, UFO magazine from the 1980s. It was fantastic in the 1980s. I don't want to name the specific companies and government elements. Well, go on, name them. Be transparent. Why not? Go on, give it a go. Go and tell. Like we got this amazing opportunity here, but I don't want to. You don't want to? Could you though? Might you? Should you? No, I don't want to. Okay, so either you don't know who they are, or there could be some fear around that. Maybe big breath change there on. Overall, the government has been the custodian of this. So again, he really wants to mark out this government idea. They're responsible. So there seems to be an upset with government. There's a vocal click before. I find that highly unethical. So either, he wants to mark out that moment for us, or maybe it's not true, but there's some problem, again, with this idea of the unethical, untransparent government. Look, the main thing for me is if you are in this position, think about it for yourself. You're in this position, you have all this information. You could be the person who lets the public know something a little more exact about what might be out there, what technology could be going on. My guess is you would have a sense of wonder and or fear. More so, wonder, fear. What he has continually, for me, is a sense of displeasure with the whole thing. His whole focus for me is on the unpleasantness of him being in this situation of the unethical, untransparent government, and him so ethical and so the opposite, so moral, the opposite of that. That's his focus at the moment. Why isn't his focus on giving us more information, more detail? I don't get it. It's all his motivation for me is all in the wrong place for this. Chase, what do you got on this one?
I think he means what he says here. But I say this knowing that this entire clip is banal, vague, and doesn't specifically mention anything except for a giant craft somebody else saw. And there's that withholding lip compression right after he says, when I interview people. He never mentions anything specific about the crafts or if the government has them. He lets you believe that that's what he's talking about, but he isn't at all. He could be talking about captured craft from enemy forces and allowing them to be studied by these big aerospace companies, which he may or may not be talking about, which I can't mention, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin. This clip is about 100% honest, but still withholding. But it's honest with nothing being said in the second half of this whatsoever. If you're a whistleblower, you should be able to name some names and something's really off in his desire to protect these companies and the government and all this. He showed up to a whistleblowing party, and I think he left his whistle in the car. Greg?
Yeah, I think he may have some restriction to protect him. I think he may have some restriction by DOD on what he is allowed to divulge. That may be the case. That would be a thing that say, do not mention X, Y, or Z. Name a company, for example. It might be his opinion. Who knows? But I agree with you. Here's the crux of everything going on, I think, because this is the most persuasive body language, I guess is the best word I'd have, not because he's trying to, but because something changes. There is one place where, and let me run down that list and I'll go back to it. It's the first time we see him move in the chair. That's a big deal because he hasn't moved in the chair till now. Well, maybe he's feeling fidgety, but some of those other questions should have made him fidgety. It's also the first time we hear the question right after he says something. First time. That's interesting. He has hard eye contact even when he's moving his head around, and he's got hard eye contact. The only time he breaks eye contact is down left. And I don't think it's for internal voice. I think it's just a quick eye break and then come back. Because listen to that change in tone of his voice, in the pitch of his voice when he breaks eye contact. Something's up. Fight or flight causes our voices to get tighter, our vocal cords to get more restrained, and that causes us to make a different sound. I think it recruxes something. And then he goes into the whole ethically thing, and then he puts his head down a bit, and then he goes certain private corporate elements. Did he run into somebody and that's why he's doing a whistleblower? We don't know, but there's a whole lot more emphasis in that sentence than anything we've heard to now. So I think we're at the crux of something big here. And then you get that unethical, another normal lip compression for him. Is that containing emotion? What is it? So the last thing I'd say is if you talked about videos you'd seen, I said, what kind of videos? What'd you see? What made you believe this? Why? How do you know this? Also would ask, how do you know about these certain private corporate elements? But that's not where we're at. This is a half entertainment, half information kind of an interview. Scott, what do you got?
All right. When he says perspective, we see an expression of anger on the if of perspective. So I think we're seeing so much anger in here. There's something hiding back there. There's something behind all this, and a lot of it is anger. When he says there are more concerning videos that left me with a lot of questions. Fading facts at the end there. Again, like Mark was saying, he's not, or maybe it was you, Chase, that said he hasn't seen anything. He has no proof of anything. It's things people have told him, those kind of things. But he does say he's seen video that makes it that it's more concerning for him. But that's where the facts fade on that. So I don't think he's very.
He didn't say where. It could have been video on Reddit.
There you go.
Yeah, it's true.
There you go. When he starts talking about how big these things are, how large this thing was, then he starts adapting with his hands and his feet and his legs. He starts moving around a lot. So I think that bothers him now. Of course, it's something, again, he didn't see. That's something he's been told. And as he delivers all this, still he looks like a little kid. His eyes are all wide, his head's moving around, his mouth gets real big and real small. It's just these odd, overplayed movements. It looks like acting in a way. It looks like it looks like he's acting, and then he uses the second word that bothers me, etc., instead of etc. It's just this guy just bugs me.
One of those tape replays.
There are many videos that are totally fair to release through a declassification process. And I find it very concerning from a transparency perspective that all that the department has declassified were those 3 famous videos. There are more concerning videos that left me with a lot of questions, yeah.
He says there are credible witnesses who could testify to Congress about spacecraft, big spacecraft.
A lot of them were very large, yeah. Like a football field kind of size. And I remember interviewing these personnel. I'm like, either these people are lying to me, they're having a psychotic break, or this is some crazy but true stuff that's happening, and I have no good explanation that's prosaic at all for this, because this is not explainable by, swamp gas, St. Elmo's fire, ball lightning, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this is like tangible technical craft they're seeing up close and personal in some cases when I interview people.
And at the centre of it all, the crash retrieval program the government has never publicly acknowledged. a program, Grusch says, that's included at least one private aerospace company that is storing alien craft.
Is that true?
That is how a lot of these relationships are. While I don't want to name the specific companies and government elements, but overall, the government has been the custodian of a lot of this, right? And they'll hand receipt it out to a cleared defense contractor to do some analysis, which I find highly unethical. You have basically a sole source arrangement, and you allow certain private corporate elements to look at this, develop a potential insight, and then sell it back to the government for profit. And I think that's totally unethical.
The problem you've got is there have been categorical denials from high-level officials in the US government, even presidents, that what you're saying is true.
Unfortunately, some elected officials were not brought in.
Only a few weeks ago, 19th of April, the head of the Pentagon's UAP investigations program, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, told Congress AARO, that's the Pentagon's UFO investigation body, has found no credible evidence thus far of extraterrestrial activity, off-world technology, or objects that defy the known laws of physics.
While a large number of cases in our holdings remain technically unresolved, this is primarily due to a lack of data associated with those cases.
Was that a lie?
Well, I know Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick. I've known him for about 8 years. And, I expressed some concerns to Dr. Kirkpatrick about a year ago and told him what I was starting to uncover. And he didn't follow up with me. And he has my phone number. He could have called me. I hope he ultimately does the right thing. He should be able to make the same investigative discoveries I did. It's totally crazy if he doesn't.
So the implication here is that the head of the very body that Congress has ordered to tell the American public the truth about UAPs is possibly misleading the American public. Do you think the American public is being lied to?
Well, they've been lied to over the years, and I'm hoping that the lies stop.
Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, so always the easiest cop-out for any of us who work in the intelligence field is to say, hey, I can't tell you that's classified. That's an easy way to get it out. So you're always going to do that. And then he goes, they are out in the cold. He's talking about presidents, heads of this whole thing. However, guys, you always know I care about body language a little bit. I care about why more than body language altogether. He divulges the why right here to me. This is the why. We're going to see it clearly in his body language as he moves in. When he says, after he says they're out in the cold, he raises his brow. Of course they are. The president's out in the cold. You've been read on to everything on earth. However, listen to the change in his pitch and his tone. And he goes to a clipped, quicker speech when he's talking about this doctor who is the head of this whole department, when he says he has my phone number. That's the way one of my ex-girlfriends would say it. She would have said, he's got my phone number, and been very quick and very aggressive. That sounds bitter. That sounds upset. If you're Greg and you're sitting across from this guy, now we go to micro interview. And by micro interview, I mean, I go along until you do something that's an anomaly, and then I focus on that. And I go along until I get to something that's an anomaly, and I focus on that. And you crawl up somebody pretty quickly doing it that way. Listen to that cadence increase. And then he goes to that persuasive head bob thing, that triaxial head bob thing he did before. And now that permanent smile he's had this entire time disappears. The sides of his mouth are drawn and his chin is thrust forward. That's interesting. There is everything I needed to know. There's a problem here. We got a problem. This guy's got a problem about how he's been treated somewhere. I don't care what he says about being disgruntled. He's got a problem. And then given the opportunity to accuse, he doesn't accuse. No accusation. Interesting. Scott, what do you got?
Explain being read in.
Yeah, so read in, all that means is I got a project, or I've got it can be massive. It can be a big area of focus, or it can be a project. You have to be read on is what I would have said in my day. Chase, I don't know what they're saying in your day, but read on is typically what we said. So you get to be part of that project. You get to be part of, Chase said it earlier. I want to know about JFK. Well, you're on that project. If you're not, there's no need for you to know that. So we're not going to read you on. And even when you get your clearance level, when you get up to like, you get up to top secret and SCI access, you got to be read into that. So it depends on where you're at and which program you're working on. You have to have a need to know. Even Chase and I could be working in two different rooms right next to each other on things that have nothing to do with each other. And we don't talk about that when we come out of the room. It's just that contained, it's compartmentalized, to Chase's point, so that it doesn't get to be easy to broadcast everything we know about situations. So yeah, I think it's a good.
Okay.
Scott.
All right. Here again, mine's going to be quick because it's so, but he doesn't answer any of the questions he's asked. He's asked 3 times. He's asked 3 questions that he doesn't answer one of them. Like, for example, last one, he says, do you think the American people are being lied to? And he says, well, they've been lied to over and over for years, and I hope it stops. It's a yes or no answer, you know? I'm just over this cat. Chase, what do you got?
So y'all touched on this. One indicator that I think I would put on the extremely reliable list, and keep in mind, baseline and context play a major role in whether this can be factored in or not. But this is someone's level of comfort with calling somebody else a liar, from politicians to criminals and maybe intelligence detainees. When somebody's lacking the willingness to call somebody else's story a lie, it's severely concerning for me. And this is due to what I call a fear of reciprocal accusation. If they're worried about their own deception, they'll be less likely to call somebody else a liar for fear of the accusations and the attention that it can bring onto their story. There's an exception here, though, in this clip we just watched. If we look at the willingness to call someone a liar on a spectrum here, Grusch, or this guy here, David, I think, gets pretty close. He expresses genuine disappointment in not being followed up with this vocal click that I have no doubt Mark is about to tell you all about. And he expresses hope that the truth will come out, then openly calls it crazy if the same conclusion isn't reached if they look at the same stuff. And on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd put him on almost a 7 here, as in he's getting close enough to calling Dr. Kirkpatrick a liar. So in essence, this is most likely some kind of honest behavior here, even though we're not getting answers. There's a ton of non-answer statements that don't answer the direct question whatsoever. Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, so look, it's only reiterating, exactly what's been said. But yes would be a good answer to, do you think they've been lied to? The US people, do you think they've been lied to? Yes or no? And it's really specific around this. But what he does is open it out to a generalization of, they've been lied to over many, many occasions, lied to over years, and I'm hoping these lies will stop. So he generalizes on this to put forward the idea of a culture of distrust for the US government. Well, so what's that agenda about? It may well be true, but why are you showing up right now to tell us that, to get that message across? And Greg, to your point, he could have called me. He has my phone number. What I have here is slighted lover.
Yeah.
Because it is. It's just like, hang on. Like, he's being ghosted. It's like, it has absolutely that nuance to it of scornfulness around it and slight. And so it's no surprise both of us have picked up on that. So what could that be about if we're correct? What were his expectations of the love and respect and the power that he would receive? What's his expectations, and how has that expectation been undercut? That for me is really interesting, because the tonality of the scorned and slighted lover there is absolutely palpable. And I think now we're starting to get onto what this really might be about. I mean, there could be a number of layers on this, but it feels to me that some of the layers are really not about craft from other dimensions, that there's some way more human, layers about the very basics of feeling respected and loved and having, a place and having some status. There, I'm done. Let's have another.
One of those tape replays.
The problem you've got is there have been categorical denials from high-level officials in the US government, even presidents, that what you're saying is true?
Unfortunately, some elected officials were not brought in.
Only a few weeks ago, 19th of April, the head of the Pentagon's UAP investigations program, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, told Congress AARO, that's the Pentagon's UFO investigation body, has found no credible evidence thus far of extraterrestrial activity, off-world technology, or objects that defy the known laws of physics.
While a large number of cases in our holdings remain technically unresolved, this is primarily due to a lack of data associated with those cases.
Was that a lie?
Well, I know Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick. I've known him for about 8 years. And, I expressed some concerns to Dr. Kirkpatrick about a year ago and told him what I was starting to uncover. And he didn't follow up with me. And he has my phone number. He could have called me. I hope he ultimately does the right thing. He should be able to make the same investigative discoveries I did. It's totally crazy if he doesn't.
So the implication here is that the head of the very body that Congress has ordered to tell the American public the truth about UAPs is possibly misleading the American public. Do you think the American public is being lied to?
Well, they've been lied to over the years, and I'm hoping that the lies stop.
The common interpretation from some commentators is that there is a non-human species and it's incredibly benevolently well disposed to the human race.
Yeah, and I think that is the logical fallacy there is because they're advanced, they're kind. We'll never really understand full intent in that because we're not them, whatever them is or are. But I think what appears to be malevolent activity has happened based on not only nuclear site probing activities, witness testimony. I think at least if we look at it through a humanistic lens, it does appear negative, at least to us.
I've been told that there have been attempts to bring down craft, that we've acted offensively against non-human craft.
There have been instances, and there are certain techniques.
Have human beings been hurt or killed by a non-human intelligence?
While I can't get into the specifics because that would reveal certain U.S. classified operations, I was briefed by a few individuals on the program that there were malevolent events like that.
Now I'm scared. People have just heard you say non-humans may well have murdered human beings.
That seems to be the case at one point, yeah.
Okay, Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, so with this guy, I'm just going to say it again. Anytime he's talking about opinion, he's free-flowing. Everything's moving along smoothly. But the minute it gets to facts, he's a desert. Nothing. There's nothing. That long yeah is his barrier, his separator, so it gives him time to move into the next thing. I do it all the time. I'll say, yeah, a bump. And it frames what I'm about to say. In his case, it's giving him time to think. He goes back to that same style we've seen, congruent messaging, eye accessing to think of what he should say. Not really internal voice this time. Rolls his head as he thinks. Then he talks about instances. There's no pressure at all when he starts talking about certain techniques. Look, if there's certain techniques to take down UFOs, why don't you mention them? Well, maybe that's classified. Well, maybe you say that. But certain techniques, there's no pressure, no ridicule, no approaches, nothing to go after it. So we can't really say whether he knows something or not. Then he says this whole thing, while I can't get into specifics, I was briefed by a few individuals on. Then we see that lip compression that I think is squelching a smile, in my opinion. I don't see this as credible because he's so much garbage he's covering up. Look, all we need is one fact to feel good about this interview. I think all four of us would feel much better if we had one fact, like there are 9 UFOs.
Yeah.
One fact. Lazar gave us facts. Whether they're facts or not, it's another story. That's the jury's out. I don't think with us it is, but with other people. But he had a number and he told us what they look like. This guy's not told us anything. Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, here's what I'd like you to do is in your imagination, or if you have, some kind of AI machine, dress this guy up as like a surfer dude. okay? And now work out how credible is what he's saying, because it's very easy to look at this and hear what he's saying, and there he is with the pressed shirt and the khaki pants on, and the classic analyst look, and you go, but hang on though, he had clearance and he seems intelligent, but if you dress him up as a surfer dude or that smash, smash, smash guy and listen to what he's saying, you'll go, this is nonsense. This is bonkers nonsense. There is not one thing in there that has any level of credibility to it. But stick a pressed shirt on somebody, some khaki pants, and say, hey, they had clearance, and now suddenly we're meant to pay attention. Well, here's what strikes me about the body language. I did pick up some body language because it got tedious after a while. And I picked up the furniture as well. He's sitting in something like a Seska Brea chair, classic bar house from the 1920s, 1930s. Now, why would furniture be important? Why should you, as somebody who understands body language, why should you understand furniture? Well, we spend a lot of time around furniture, and knowing how different pieces of furniture act is kind of useful. This is a Seska Brea chair. Okay, this is classic. This is from the 1960s edition of it. You see, it's got bent tubular steel on it, which means to rock backwards and forwards in it as he's doing, and I want you to watch that, takes a lot of energy. Takes a lot of energy. In order for me to move that bent piping backwards and forwards, it's a lot of effort. There is something going on in him right now. There's some pent up energy in his core right now that means he can move that chair backwards and forwards. I think that's very, very interesting. Were people killed by a non-human intelligence? That seems to be the case at one point, yeah. Well, I mean, that seems to be the case. Like it is or it isn't the case. Like it is or it isn't at one point. Well, so there are points where it didn't happen. Like it's an on and off. It's on or off. You're either dead or you're not dead. Okay, there's no in between. I understand the quantum mechanics you're trying to do around moving interdimensionally, but it doesn't work in our dimension. Okay, a human being gets dead or not dead. There is no in between state on that one. Oh, still super annoying. Greg, what do you got on this one? Oh, Chase?
Yeah. And in the comments, just let us know if you think that Mark just made up the name of that chair design. All right. The first part of this is him just explaining open source, well-known information in an even more vague, ambiguous, and what I would maybe call informationless way. And at this mention of there's attempts to bring down the craft, he says there have been instances. He doesn't say of what. Anyone on planet Earth, including a 1-month-old baby, can say there have been instances. And if you're 4 years old, you can say the other thing he says. There are certain techniques, because he doesn't tell you what kind. And this is so vague, he could be talking about an episode of Hell's Kitchen with Gordon Ramsay. And when they're bringing up malevolent events, there are some strange facial expressions that form on his face here, but they look like acting. This tight-lipped, withholding expression and maybe a little horizontal stretching. And when he says at the beginning or at the end there, that seems to be the case at one point. Not that seems to be the case. He said that seems to be the case at one point. He's well-spoken. So I think this was not an accidental slip-up of language. This entire interview was rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed, probably for months on end. I think he's thinking of a single incident that he's been maybe told about by these individuals he references, or one that he's been told to memorize in case it comes up. That's all I got.
One of those tape replays.
The common interpretation from some commentators is that there is a non-human species and it's incredibly benevolently well disposed to the human race.
Yeah, and I think that is the logical fallacy there is because they're advanced, they're kind. We'll never really understand full intent in that because we're not them, whatever them is or are. But I think what appears to be malevolent activity has happened. based on not only nuclear site probing activities, witness testimony. I think, at least if we look at it through a humanistic lens, it does appear negative, at least to us.
I've been told that there have been attempts to bring down craft, that we've acted offensively against non-human craft.
There have been instances, and there are certain techniques.
Have human beings been hurt or killed by a non-human intelligence?
While I can't get into the specifics because that would reveal certain U.S. classified operations, I was briefed by a few individuals on the program that there were malevolent events like that.
Now I'm scared. People have just heard you say non-humans may well have murdered human beings.
That seems to be the case at one point, yeah.
And it's quite clear that you're talking about agreements between America and non-human intelligences. Have we made agreements with non-human intelligences?
That's the kind of information I really hope national leadership is able to get to the bottom of.
I need to pin you down on this. Are there agreements between non-human intelligences and the American government?
I think that's a question that I would like to know all the details of as well.
We do know of at least one agreement among humans that's worth noting. This 1971 agreement between the US and the USSR on measures to reduce the risk of nuclear war. Whether or not you believe Dave Grusch, this document proves the two superpowers were aware that UAP existed, whatever they were.
If you look at Article 3 of that treaty, it talks about unidentified objects near nuclear facilities or interfering with communications. And that is a treaty that has been used, from what I understand, to notify each other if there's a concerning event.
And that's a way of saying to the Russians, hey, don't shoot at us, it's not us.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a concern because of the secrecy. There is an environment where you could have almost like a false flag, where true non-prosaic UAP situation could be contrived as, a provocation of something from a nation state, and we want to de-escalate that.
If this is true, if the stakes are so high, if the fate of the human race is at stake, perhaps it's no surprise to hear Grusch say the US government will do anything to keep these secrets safe.
Can I put it to you that crimes must have been committed?
At the very least, I saw substantive evidence that white-collar crime was committed.
Have people been killed to protect this secret?
Based on the people I talked to, that was an ongoing concern. Yeah, unfortunately, I've heard some really un-American things I don't want to repeat right now.
So you have a strong suspicion that people have been murdered to protect the secret?
Over the years, yeah.
Coming up.
All right, Mark, what do you got?
Just one thing on this. White collar crime was committed. I think, we may be getting something factual there. I mean, not that that's anything new. So just so everybody knows, white collar crime does get committed. It's one of the most prevalent crimes, in fact. It doesn't get prosecuted a lot, really hard to track down. It takes a lot of people to prosecute. So white collar crime was committed. So we've managed to get down to something a little more tangible. Now, he won't... he's not saying the names of anybody, but it was really un-American things, and he doesn't want to repeat them right now. So it's white-collar crime, very un-American. I would assume, just how prevalent white-collar crime is, that a lot of it is happening in America. That's just the way it is. That's just the nature of crime. So he is a whistleblower. He has lost his whistle. I have the whistle here, but I want to show you. Don't worry, Scott, it's going to be okay. But Scott has been protecting his ears for years, and now he's going. Now I'm going to lose them on the behavior panel. No, because this is the extent of his whistleblowing. That's it. That is the whistle that's getting blown on this one. White collar crime has occurred. There, you heard it. You heard it here first. Chase, what revelations do you have on this one?
Well, I'm sure Greg's excited that a fact came out. But this video here is essentially just taking an article off of Reddit, then running it through ChatGPT and telling ChatGPT to make it vague and strip all detail from it. That's all I got. Scott?
All right. The first question right out of the gate, I'm always talking about the confirmation nod, where because no, I didn't do it, but they're confirming no, they didn't do it. This is the classic here. This is the one Dr. Ekman talks about all the time. It's like as the question's coming out, he knows what the question is. It finally dawns on him. He starts shaking his head yes. And as he answers, he's shaking his head yes. It's not just the one confirmation nod. It's just like, yeah, it starts that small little nod like that. So that right there, I think for me anyway, was the most exciting thing I've seen in the last 4 videos. And that is definitely a yes nod. So he's saying yes to that question. And at the second question, he has to think about the answer a little bit, and then again he nods several times while he's thinking about it. So that again is a yes. And we're seeing the lip compression. That lets us know that this subject is a no-no, and he's got to watch what he says about that. But I agree with you, Chase. This guy has rehearsed this. This is nothing, and this is new for him. This is like, we recognize this from prepping witnesses and all those questions that come in from 90 million different angles. And why would you ask that? Because you never know. So he's ready. I think you're right. Months. Did this for months because he's ready for anything. And he cannot answer anything by answering it. Fascinating. It's fascinating. Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, I know watching him is interesting because he evades very effectively. Yeah. When he says, that's what I want to know as well. Well, hold on. I thought you were coming to tell us what's going on. Then he does something that's really one hell of a stretch, but he grabs something factual and concrete and wraps himself in it as this is proof. It's proof that Russia and the U.S. had agreed not to launch a nuclear missile until they verified whether what was going on was an attack or not, is proof there were UFOs. No, that would be like me saying, Mark, hey, man, late tonight, I'm going out back and do some work in the yard. Don't shoot over there just in case. Yeah. That's kind of what we're talking about. That's very sensible. Yeah, really, really logical to me. However, it must have been UFOs. It must have been something, because we all know when we say UFO, it doesn't mean things. It means unexplained. That's all it means. Unexplained things that show up on radar. And there's been plenty of that occur in the past. We almost had nuclear war, I understand, like more than one time because of radar issues where we got anomalous pictures. So look, that's a stretch for my taste. The only fact, and it's a hell of a stretch. And then when he says it's been used, that's been used from what I understand, there's a lilt in his voice at the end because he doesn't know either. The only time we see him starting to really use body language and express himself again is when he pontificates and he's given the opportunity to talk about what he thinks is true. There's a big difference. I don't see any substantive evidence. I would just say, like, what substantive evidence have you seen? What? You got some now. You brought it up. What substantive evidence do you have? I didn't see any. And then that last hard claim, as he gets to it, he does the squelch of the smile again, I think. So I've lost interest with you, Mark, and you, Scott, but we need to go through these next few so people can see what he has to say about why.
Good. We're good. Mark.
One of those tape replays.
And it's quite clear that you're talking about agreements between America and non-human intelligences. Have we made agreements with non-human intelligences?
That's the kind of information I really hope national leadership is able to get to the bottom of.
I need to pin you down on this. Are there agreements between non-human intelligences and the American government?
I think that's a question that I would like to know all the details of as well.
We do know of at least one agreement among humans that's worth noting. This 1971 agreement between the US and the USSR on measures to reduce the risk of nuclear war. Whether or not you believe Dave Grusch, this document proves the two superpowers were aware that UAP existed, whatever they were.
If you look at Article 3 of that treaty, it talks about unidentified objects near nuclear facilities or interfering with communications. And that is a treaty that has been used, from what I understand, to notify each other if there's a concerning event.
And that's a way of saying to the Russians, hey, don't shoot at us, it's not us.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a concern because of the secrecy. There is an environment where you could have almost like a false flag, where true non-prosaic UAP situation could be contrived as, a provocation of something from a nation state, and we want to de-escalate that.
If this is true, if the stakes are so high, if the fate of the human race is at stake, perhaps it's no surprise to hear Grusch say the US government will do anything to keep these secrets safe.
Can I put it to you that crimes must have been committed?
At the very least, I saw substantive evidence that white-collar crime was committed.
Have people been killed to protect this secret?
Based on the people I talked to, that was an ongoing concern. Yeah, unfortunately, I've heard some really un-American things I don't want to repeat right now.
So you have a strong suspicion that people have been murdered to protect the secret?
Over the years, yeah.
Coming up.
Do you have any kind of mental illness?
No.
Have you ever had a psychosis, a delusion?
No.
Is there anything in your medical history that might be capable of being interpreted as a reason why you might be confabulating, making things up?
No, I'm not a disgruntled employee. I resigned on my own accord because I thought altruistically it's more appropriate to show thought leadership on the outside on this now, because I hit an impasse within the government to try to right this wrong.
So I've got to be blunt about this.
Yeah.
You're not making this up. This is not a lie.
No, absolutely not.
Because everybody watching this right now is looking at your face. Mm-hmm. They're going, is this guy for real?
I am for real. And I'm sitting here at great personal risk and obvious professional risk by talking to you today.
You've told us that we really are not alone. Even though you believe what you say is true, you haven't been fed disinformation. It's a common thing in intelligence for governments to mislead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was very sensitive to that fact. Was this some kind of ruse against me? Am I being used in any kind of way? And I took about 4 years being very methodical before I filed my whistleblower complaint to be absolutely certain of these basic facts.
So take me through the process of how you convinced yourself that this is real.
Mm-hmm. Well, based on the credentialed people that came to me, some of these subjects provided me sensitive foreign intelligence to read, sensitive program documents and photographs to evaluate, and then described in very specific detail how all this worked. And they were telling me the exact, extremely specific details that it all checked out. Yeah.
All right, Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, I'll be short on this one. He laughs when he's asked, is it a lie? That's usually a good indicator for me that I'm going to dig a little closer. It doesn't mean it's always true that a person is lying when they laugh when you ask, but it's usually an indicator that you need to pay attention, especially when you haven't laughed when you ask hard questions before. This time the compression looks unhappy. It doesn't look like just a control. There's a little grief in there. He wouldn't know. Let's be honest. He's asked, are you being fed misinformation? That's how misinformation works, is you don't know you're being fed it, so you become a patsy and you become part of it. That's why there's so many cutaways and nothing concrete for you to be involved with. And he just described exactly how disinformation would work. If Chase is a disgruntled guy, a guy I don't trust, I feed him all kinds of bullshit so that when he leaves, he's going, yeah, and yeah, and yeah. That's how it works. And then there's that compression with the chin engaged again. That looks like control of a smile. It's just me, maybe. Chase, you saw the same thing earlier. I hope you saw it in this one. Chase, what do you got?
Yeah, I did. And there is one incredibly unusual thing here that we see in all the other videos is lip compression all throughout this video at precise moments where we would reasonably expect to see some information withheld by a person who's being told to withhold information by the government. But right here, we see the withholding come immediately after he denies having a mental illness. And if you look, a very small smile after that lip compression. And the interviewer says, and this is not a lie, asking him, this is the most expressive we see his legs and lower body in the entire interview. This could boil down to the sudden increase in the intensity of questioning, maybe. He also eye blocks during his initial denial here. So his eyes close during his initial denial. He uses emotional accessing here, downright movement, in the conversation where we would expect a truthful person to access emotional states or recall emotional states. And I think, I don't know, filing an inspector general complaint is an emotional thing in the military. I don't care who you are. So I'll give him the benefit of doubt there. And when he's describing people telling him these extremely specific details, he says it in this clip. This is when he's the most honest here in this clip, I think. And I think he truly did hear a lot from someone, whether it was some dude he met on 4chan or Twitter who FaceTimed with him, or a government official. He doesn't say, but he says they gave him a lot of information. So it was probably a human involved in this. Scott, what do you got?
All right. This is the most anger we've seen so far because he's touching on his mental stability. I think that got on his last nerve because his volume goes up, his tone gets a little bit stronger, his cadence speeds up a little bit. Everything goes up right there. So this bothers him. That makes him not angry, but you can see that hint of anger on him. And then when he talks about the personal and professional risk, where's that? We already know that what he's saying has been okayed by the DOD to say. What's he risking here? So they're going to kill him. They're going to say, yeah, dude, you can go say that. Everybody knows it. And they're going to kill him for that. They're going to cut him off so he can't work anymore. This is, he has no evidence of anything. So why would they do that in the first place? Something's up here. Mark, what do you got?
Yep. So the questioning does get more intense and personal. But he's the person who brings up the idea of disgruntled employee, which I find interesting, saying I'm not one of those. It isn't immediate. We go down the possible mental health ideas. It wouldn't be where I'd jump to straight to, well, are you a disgruntled employee? He goes there. I find that interesting. He says he filed a complaint. Well, then that's disgruntled. He's not gruntled about it. He's disgruntled about it. So that seems now. I may not be hearing this properly. I know he filed a complaint of reprisal. That's what the documents say. I didn't hear him say IG complaint. Did either of you hear him say IG? Because I can't work out what he's saying before complaint. I can't make out what he says. I don't think it was IG. I don't think he says complaint of reprisal. I can't tell what it is. Now that I can't tell what it is means there's a little bit of, Scott, for me, fading fact in that moment, because I've heard everything else he says other than exactly what he's saying kind of complaint it is. It might be some terminology that I just can't get, but even so, I'm pretty good at English, and so far he's been pretty good at getting information out, and I can't hear exactly what it is. So that alone, whether it might even be IG, and I haven't managed to hear it, that alone, that I can't tell the letters I and G, mean there's something about this complaint, because he brings it up and says, I'm not disgruntled anyway, made a complaint. What type of complaint? We can't quite hear that, apparently. So, interesting, he's being repped by a former Inspector General, auditor of the intelligence, in order to make this complaint. That's important because it's going to come up in a moment. I think he's going to slightly, what words does he use? What did he say? If it's a disinformation campaign, he said, oh yeah, look out for conflation. He said, look out for conflation. I think he's about to conflate two auditor generals, to inspector generals, the auditors, I think, coming up. Let's see if I'm correct.
One of those tape replays.
Do you have any kind of mental illness?
No.
Have you ever had a psychosis, a delusion?
No.
Is there anything in your medical history that might be capable of being interpreted as a reason why you might be confabulating, making things up?
No, I'm not a disgruntled employee. I resigned on my own accord because I thought altruistically it's more appropriate to show thought leadership on the outside on this now, because I hit an impasse within the government to try to right this wrong.
So I've got to be blunt about this.
Yeah.
You're not making this up. This is not a lie.
No, absolutely not.
Because everybody watching this right now is looking at your face. They're going, is this guy for real?
I am for real. And I'm sitting here at great personal risk and obvious professional risk by talking to you today.
You've told us that we really are not alone. Even though you believe what you say is true, you haven't been fed disinformation. It's a common thing in intelligence for governments to mislead.
Yeah, I was very sensitive to that fact. Was this some kind of ruse against me? Am I being used in any kind of way? And I took about 4 years being very methodical before I filed my whistleblower complaint to be absolutely certain of these basic facts.
So take me through the process of how you convinced yourself that this is real.
Well, based on the credential people that came to me, some of these subjects provided me sensitive foreign intelligence to read, sensitive program documents and photographs to evaluate, and then described in very specific detail how all this worked. And they were telling me the exact, extremely specific details that it all checked out. Yeah.
You know, the thing I have trouble with, it's the fact that my experience as a journalist is it's very hard for governments to keep secrets. Most things leak. Your government leaks like a sieve. Why hasn't this leaked?
Well, I've certainly been the recipient of a lot of U.S. government secrets, and I can tell you they've never seen the light of day. That's for sure. And I guess ostensibly this has leaked like a sieve for decades, but it was a very sophisticated disinformation campaign where they have allowed some of the truth to come out through some of their trade crafts, but they've disenfranchised people, they've stigmatized it, they made it like as this total like wacky thing to talk about. So anybody who may come forward with that kind of information is looked like a total tinfoil hat guy, because it's a perfect amalgamation of disinformation to just make it look crazy.
The best reason to believe Dave Grusch may be this document. Remember that whistleblower complaint he filed? It would seem it hasn't fallen on deaf ears.
So the Inspector General of the Intelligence Services of the United States has the information you've got.
Yes.
And more importantly, the Inspector General made a determination about the credibility of your complaint.
They found, after interviewing myself and the subjects and other subjects that I'm not even cognizant on who they were, they found my complaint urgent and credible for the intelligence committees.
The word credible is important, you appreciate. So an official investigatory body of the United States government has determined that your allegations are credible.
Correct.
Chase, what do you got?
Here it is again. We're seeing the word sophisticated disinformation again. And while I think his disdain for the disinformation about this topic is real, it seems he's got a great deal of unusual respect, maybe, for the process of creating some kind of sophisticated disinformation campaign. It's just unusual to see. When he's talking about the steps of the disinformation process, he uses his left side, which throughout the interview, he illustrates positive things over there on his left side, which I found pretty interesting as well. And he says, I'm not sure what the report is, but I'm glad it's being looked into. I think there's one point where he says credible with a huge question mark at the end here. And this is in his baseline. He's somehow become a person who uses uptalk, but also uses this weird upward inflection to emphasize things that he thinks are important. So take that with a grain of salt. We have an atypical baseline on this person here. Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, he brings up one thing. He does a resume statement to use something you always say, Chase. And what he does is say, I had lots of secrets or lots of classified information. That never met the light of day. But that's you. That's you. That's only you. And the amount of, and so he's declaring, I never leak secrets, so they must not leak. Well, that's a bad assumption. That's just a bad basis for an argument, because what we know is that you can't hold secrets very effectively in the U.S. And by the way, just for 1 second, think about what it would take for this undertaking. You're thinking about UFOs, but I'm thinking about logistics. How many truckloads of X need to go there? What kind of chemicals? What kinds of spectrographs and stuff to test materials? Somewhere along the line, your supply chain gets to be compromising on an operation that was big enough to hold the same problem we had with Lazar. Well, how does all this work? How does that work? How does this other thing work? Somehow or another, all those pieces of equipment have to get there and nobody can talk. And trust me, there's some truck driver somewhere who was talking in the truck stop. Hey, I put this thing on the back of my truck the other day and drove in down there. What was it? And people collect intelligence that way. If you don't think that's true, look at TikTok and all those systems and tools, or any of your social media, all the crap that people put out there, that they can build a very quick image of you and AI can do it for them. So look, it would be really hard to hide something this big, and all those leaks that he's not taking into account while he does his resume statement are part of the thing. The minute he gets back to opinion and belief, he starts to illustrate and do all those things again. But every time you ask him a fact, he gets very, very contained. And again, I'm going to say it may be because that whistleblower does not protect his sources, and he may be ready to compromise them, so we have to be careful with it. But he's got the straightest face we've seen yet in the beginning of this when he's talking about, I never divulged information. Scott, what do you got?
All right. This is the part that backs up my point earlier, where he says, I've heard plenty of stuff I shouldn't be talking about, and I've never said a word about any of it. But he's talking about this. None of this stuff is top secret. None of this stuff is a secret at all. It's all been okayed, and he's just out talking about it for whatever reason. Mark, what do you got?
No, he's not really talking about it.
That's true too. That's true too. He's just saying, I'm so
words, not content.
What I'd say from my point of view, having sat in meetings where they are closed meetings and we know what's happening in the meetings cannot be talked about. They are secret meetings. There's all kinds of stuff that people say in that. Why don't those secrets get out? Because they're boring. They're just bureaucratic, boring. My guess is he has a whole bunch of top secret stuff that he knows that he's never told anybody else. Why? Maybe because he's very diligent. 2, because it's bureaucratic, boring stuff. Nobody would ever listen to it. If you said, I'm going to tell you a secret, and you told them, yeah, they'd just go, like, what do you mean? What do you mean? It's apropos of nothing, but everything in a meeting. When you have a certain meeting, what biscuits did you have? I can't tell you. It's a secret. It's a secret what biscuits you have. Everything is a secret in there. If I were to tell you, I might say Jaffa cakes. Now, maybe everybody would go, well, that's not a biscuit, that's a cake. Well, it's both a biscuit and a cake, and we'd have to get into the Jaffa cakes. Jaffa cakes. Yeah.
What is that?
Well, it's an English, everybody English will know, it's an English biscuit, okay, but it's counted as a cake. A cake is not taxed. A biscuit is taxed. Biscuit, cooked twice. The moment you cook something twice, there is a value-added tax to it. But if you call something a cake, but it's the size of a biscuit, it's cheaper because the government don't tax it. Anyway, you see what idiot pedantry people get into if you get inside the secrets of things. So most secrets aren't told because they're just plain old boring. Now, the interviewer has a very, in my mind, soft look of pleasure on his face as this subject talks about disinformation. I think the interviewer here knows that there is smells, can taste, there is something up around the idea of him talking about it not being disinformation and it feeling a little bit to the interviewer like disinformation. Go back, look at that interviewer's face and just see if you can see the smile of irony on his face as he hears all of this. Now, let me just get into some nitty-gritty of this. There's a complaint of retaliation. So this is the Inspector General complaint that's out there. It's a complaint about retaliation, okay? And that has gone from an IG to the new IG. But so when he says, look, your allegations are credible, the allegations are credible. The allegation being made is not one that there's flying saucers. The IG haven't gone, oh yeah, it's credible that you're saying there's flying saucers. The allegation being made is one of him fearing retaliation. And the IG has said, yeah, that's a credible. Now, he's mixed the two up. He hasn't said, no, look, if you think my complaint is about people aren't paying attention to my idea that there's interdimensional beings down, that's not the case, okay? The IG is paying attention to a complaint of potential retaliation going on, that he's not telling us that. So he's conflating the two things together, and that, by his own logic, is disinformation. That's all I got on that one.
Beautiful.
That was beautiful.
Thank you. Just the bit on Jaffa cakes, or the rest of it as well?
No wonder we left England, man. They charge you once you cook it twice.
Yes.
They charge for all kinds of stuff.
Yes. Cook it once, that's not a luxury. Cook it twice, that's a luxury. That's value-added tax.
Have you never noticed English beer glasses have a line that you don't fill past?
Oh, and the measurements there are insane.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You get taxed on that much.
Scott, did you ever hear of the window tax? They started taxing people's windows, so they bricked them up.
Yeah.
To avoid the tax. Go around old England, you'll see bricked up windows to the side.
One of those tape replays.
You know, the thing I have trouble with, it's the fact that my experience as a journalist is it's very hard for governments to keep secrets. Most things leak. Mm-hmm. Your government leaks like a sieve. Mm-hmm. Why hasn't this leaked?
Well, I've certainly been the recipient of a lot of U.S. government secrets, and I can tell you they've never seen the light of day. That's for sure. And I guess ostensibly this has leaked like a sieve for decades, but it was a very sophisticated disinformation campaign where, they have allowed some of the truth to come out through some of their trade crafts, but they've disenfranchised people, they've stigmatized it, they made it like as this total like wacky thing to talk about. So anybody who may come forward with that kind of information is looked like a total tinfoil hat guy, because it's a perfect amalgamation of disinformation to just make it look crazy.
The best reason to believe Dave Grusch may be this document. Remember that whistleblower complaint he filed? It would seem it hasn't fallen on deaf ears.
So the Inspector General of the Intelligence Services of the United States has the information you've got.
Yes.
And more importantly, the Inspector General made a determination about the credibility of your complaint.
They found, after interviewing myself and the subjects and other subjects that I'm not even cognizant on who they were, they found my complaint urgent and credible for the intelligence committees.
The word credible is important,
yes.
You appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
So an official investigatory body of the United States government has determined that your allegations are credible.
Correct.
Just one more thing.
All right, Mark, what do you think we've seen at this point? How's it look to you?
Yeah, what do I think we've seen? Well, I'm glad to be towards the end of it all now. I think we've potentially seen a pedantic, grudge-bearing individual with the potential, I think, for unwittingly or wittingly being a source of disinformation. Chase, what do you reckon?
I'm going to go long on this. I apologize. I sat for a while this morning trying to figure out just what it is that's making me uneasy about this whole thing. It feels dark to me, and it feels like something is off about this. And it has the feeling of a person involved in something bigger than themselves, as if they were maybe told to make this happen, maybe told to blow the whistle in an orchestrated way. And this has the hallmarks. This has the hallmarks of a disinformation campaign. I'm the guy that trains the U.S. Army Psychological Operations Command on this stuff. Unusual tonality, like we saw here, happens often on stage. Unusual and repetitive phrases happen often on stage. Immediate delivery of lines without taking time to process questions happens on stage. Lack of anger about things you're supposed to be angry about happens on stage. Immediate mouth closure after delivery of lines happens on stage. Vagueness happens when questions are asked that aren't in the script on stage. This feels staged or somehow artificial, and I'm not saying it is by any means any of that, because maybe he believes most of this. I think it's possible he believes most of this, but something is very off and almost seems dark about this. And the second thing I wonder about is whether this is about the greater good or him, if the first thing isn't true. Greg?
Yeah, so we're following the same path. Let me tell you this. There's two things. I'm going to give you two possibilities and then talk about something specific. First of all, when you are swimming in oil, you begin to think that oil's okay. Or as I say, fish taste like what they swim in. So if a fish swims in oil, they taste like oil. If, in fact, what you've been doing for the past 10 years, 6 years, 4 years is talking to people who have seen UFOs, you then become much, much, much more susceptible to whatever you hear. You know, skeptics, even if all they hear every day is UFO talk, UFO talk, UFO talk, it gets more difficult for them to discern. So let's assume for a minute that he's been doing these interviews, and now somebody comes along and says, hey, we got a bunch of them back behind the door. Now he falls for that. Now he becomes a true believer. That's one possibility. The other possibility is he's an outright disinformation campaign. The reason I feel like he's more like the second is because I see that squelched smile. It's not a compress, contain emotion or information. It looks more than one time with that chin boss eruption and all that, like he's trying to contain a smile because his upper face is smiling. So then I go, okay, if it's disinformation, why? Is that disinformation because he's disgruntled? Is that disinformation because of something? But there are also two really good indicators that he is hurt, bitter, or something. Mark, the bitter girlfriend, the bitter boyfriend thing in there, that you can't miss. So those two pieces, I think, Chase, it's one of the two, in my opinion, and I don't conjecture which. I just say these are my options that I can see. And then when you add that bitterness, it makes it dark and makes you wonder, what's going on here? Scott, what do you got?
I think this guy's on a mission. I think he's been set to say this, whether somebody said here, like you were saying, you got to go say this, but this is on purpose. I really think this is disinformation. And I think this has been set up by somebody else. At the beginning, he says, I always want to be a part of something that was bigger than me, just like you were saying, Chase. I always want to be a part of that. And by doing this, by being the sacrificial lamb, is what it's supposed to look like, then that's what he's doing. It's about time for him to get out anyway, with what he's doing. Why not go ahead and do that? And if all these people came to him pretty much in this short amount of time, start talking to him about it, why would they choose him to talk about it? Why would these people be telling him other than that? So whether it's something he's at the beginning just said, you know what, I will do that, or they pushed him out of it and he doesn't realize it. I think he does realize what's happening, but there's always that chance that he didn't realize that's what happened. But I think he's on a mission. I think he's doing this on purpose, and not for the morality of it or the ethics of it at all. But that's just what he puts it on. So he has to get angry and come up with his anger when he talks about that. I think that's why we're seeing that there. But he always wanted to be a part of something that's bigger than him, and this is the way he can do that, because he's not going to get in trouble for what he's saying. He's already okayed or had okayed everything that he would talk about. So I'll end it by saying I think he was on a mission. All right, fellas, I think this is another good one, and we'll see you next time.
So what do you got? You know what?